The violet-sealed note was already a cruelty before Lady Maud Vane wrote a single word inside it. It lay on the escritoire at Hadleigh Close, cream paper bright against the dark walnut, waiting for ink with the patience of a trap. Outside the drawing-room windows, Hampshire wore an April softness that made every lie inside the house seem more deliberate. The lawn had been brushed by rain. The hedges shone. A pair of rooks moved across the pale sky above the lane, free to leave without permission. Cecily Vane stood near the accounts table with a pencil in her hand and a household ledger open before her, wondering whether a gardener's hungry children could be hidden under miscellaneous maintenance as easily as Florence's new ribbons had been hidden under linen repair. The room had been arranged to appear prosperous. The silver tea service glowed from fresh polishing. The curtains had been pinned to conceal fading along the lower edges. A bowl of forced hyacinths covered the smell of damp in the carpet. Hadleigh Close did not possess wealth anymore, but it still possessed performance, and Lady Maud considered performance a virtue when money failed. Lady Maud Vane, daughter of the late Earl of Winthrop and widow of Sir Edmund Vane, Baronet, sat in the best chair with a fashion plate on her lap, examining a drawing of a London evening gown as if it were a military campaign. Her black silk morning dress was severe, expensive, and not quite paid for. She had been born to rank, married into Sir Edmund's house, and remained convinced that good blood excused every debt, except the ones owed to her. "Cecily," she said without looking up, "do not stand there with that expression. You make arithmetic look tragic." Florence Vane laughed from before the pier glass, where Martha knelt to pin the hem of a pale blue walking dress newly arrived from London. Florence's golden hair had been arranged in soft loops, her cheeks were bright, and the new dress made her look like a girl's society was already preparing to forgive for anything. "It is tragic, Mamma." Cecily has been staring at that ledger, as though it contains a proposal. "A proposal would require optimism," Lady Maud replied. "Your cousin prefers correction, cousin." Lady Maud used the word when she wished to deny intimacy. Sister had appeared yesterday, when Lady Maud needed Cecily to mend Florence's gloves without complaint. Cecily kept her gaze on the ledger. "Mr. Ellery has not been paid in 6 weeks. Then he has enjoyed 6 weeks of expectation. Many men live on less. His wife is expecting a child. Then I hope expectation suits the family." Florence smiled at herself in the glass. "Must we discuss gardeners before luncheon? It gives everything such a muddy feeling." Martha's fingers paused at the hem. Cecily saw the old maid's head lower by an inch, the tiny movement of someone trying not to hear what she could not answer. Martha had served Cecily's mother, Eleanor Vane, before illness emptied the best rooms, and Lady Maud filled them with colder air. Cecily had learned many things at Hadleigh after her father died. She had learned that silence could be demanded as gratitude. She had learned that a turned glove could pass for economy if the stitching was neat. She had learned that servants suffered first when gentlewomen wished to appear comfortable. "The music master has been paid," Cecily said. "Of course he has," Florence said. "I cannot be presented in London and sing like a parish child. His payment was entered under charity linen." Lady Maud's eyes lifted at last. They were handsome eyes, dark and sharp, and they could make a correction feel like a verdict. "You have a vulgar devotion to where money has been. Money that belongs to a household should not become invisible. How fortunate that you understand invisibility." The words landed lightly because Lady Maud preferred small knives. Florence's laugh followed, prettier and less skilled. Cecily lowered her pencil. She did not trust her hand to write. She had spent years mastering the art of remaining composed while being reduced, and most days she succeeded well enough that people mistook endurance for absence. She was 24 years old, plain by county standards, useful by necessity, and unmarried, because no one had ever thought to ask what she wanted when there were accounts to balance, and Florence to prepare for admiration. A footman entered with the Morning Post on a salver. Lady Maud's hand moved before he finished bowing. She took the top letter, saw the seal, and stilled. Cecily noticed because noticing was the only power she had been allowed to keep. The paper bore Lady Beatrice Morland's hand. Lady Beatrice was aunt to Adrian Vale, Duke of Loxley, and that connection alone was enough to change the temperature of the room. Florence turned from the mirror. "Is it from London?" Lady Maud broke the seal. Her eyes moved over the page, quickly at first, then again with a slower, brighter attention. "Lady Beatrice requires assistance with charity ledgers. Some committee accounts have become inconvenient." Florence wrinkled her nose. "How dull. Dullness may be useful when attached to a duke's household." Lady Maud looked at Cecily. That look was worse than dislike. It was inspiration. Cecily set the pencil down. "If Lady Beatrice needs copying, I can prepare a clean summary and send it." "Send it," Lady Maud repeated. "How timid, no, Cecily. You will take yourself to Loxley House." Florence turned fully. "Mamma, not Cecily. Especially Cecily." Lady Maud rose and crossed to the escritoire where the cream paper waited. Lady Beatrice requested discretion, and no one has ever accused Cecily of attracting attention. Florence pressed a hand to her mouth, delighted. What a recommendation. Cecily's chest tightened. "If I am to go, I should be properly invited. You were invited by usefulness. That is the only invitation you are likely to receive from that circle." Lady Maud sat and uncapped the ink. "Still, His Grace should be warned what charity is sending him." The nib touched paper. Cecily saw the opening before Lady Maud's hand shielded the page. "Your Grace, not Lady Beatrice." The room seemed to draw in around her. "Why are you writing to the Duke?" "Because Loxley House belongs to him. Lady Beatrice wrote to you, and I am answering the greater authority. There is no need to mention me to His Grace." Lady Maud smiled. "My dear, the need is precisely the point." Martha rose from the hem without permission. "My lady, Miss Cecily has done nothing to deserve mockery." The sentence fell too loudly. Florence's eyes widened. Lady Maud's pen stopped. Slowly, she turned toward the maid. "Martha, how long have you been at Hadleigh?" Martha's face lost color. 28 years, my lady." 28 years can breed a sense of ownership in servants. "It is an unfortunate disease." Cecily stepped forward. Martha spoke from loyalty. Then loyalty has made her forget her place. "Please," Cecily said, hating the word even as she used it. "Do not punish her for my sake, for your sake." Lady Maud's smile returned, cooler than before. "How grand you sound. You mistake yourself for someone costly." Cecily looked at Martha, at the hands that had warmed her sheets in winters when coal ran low, at the face that still softened whenever Eleanor Vane was remembered. The trap closed without a sound. Lady Maud did not need to say that Martha could be dismissed by evening. They all understood. Florence adjusted one ribbon at her waist. Cecily could go and come back before dinner. It might even amuse His Grace. "Exactly," Lady Maud said, and finished writing. Cecily stood very still. She could refuse. She could fling Lady Maud's note into the fire and walk out with nothing but her old gloves and pride. Then Martha would lose her place. Mr. Ellery might lose his wages forever. Florence would still go to London in blue silk. Lady Maud would still sit in Sir Edmund's chair and call necessity by prettier names. "Martha will accompany me," Cecily said. Lady Maud sprinkled sand over the note. "If you insist upon making even humiliation respectable." She folded the paper and sealed it with violet wax. The seal pressed down like a bruise. "Wear the grey muslin. It tells the truth without assistance." Florence laughed. Cecily left the room before her face betrayed her. In the narrow chamber that had once been a dressing room and was now hers, by Lady Maud's mercy, she took her bonnet from the bed and opened the small work-basket beneath the window. At the bottom, wrapped in old silk, lay her mother's cracked pearl-handled fan. Its guard bore a fine dark line where the pearl had split years ago, but the silk still held a faded sheen. Cecily touched it once. Her mother had carried beauty gently. Lady Maud wore it like a weapon. "You don't have to do this," Martha whispered from the doorway. Cecily slipped the fan into her reticule. "Yes, I do. She's wrong about you. She is often wrong." Cecily tied the reticule strings. "That has never prevented her from being obeyed." Below stairs, the carriage waited on the gravel sweep. Lady Maud placed the violet-sealed note in Cecily's gloved hand as if handing over a spoiled ribbon fit for the rag drawer. Do not embarrass us more than nature has already done. Florence watched from the window, bright and satisfied. Martha climbed in after Cecily, her jaw set hard enough to crack decorum. As the carriage turned from Hadleigh Close toward the London road, Cecily looked down at the note resting in her lap. She did not know the words inside. She knew their purpose. Some letters carried invitations, some carried news. This one carried a room full of laughter meant to arrive before she did. She pressed her palm over the reticule, feeling the shape of the broken fan beneath the fabric, and sat upright while the house that had made her small receded behind her. Lady Maud believed she was sending a joke to a duke. Cecily only hoped she could survive the moment he understood it. By the time the carriage reached Mayfair, the violet seal had warmed beneath Cecily's gloved hand, as if the insult inside possessed its own pulse. London had gathered around them, mile by mile, first in smoke beyond hedgerows, then in streets thick with wheels, hooves, vendors, and ladies, whose bonnets looked as though they had been built to survive judgment. Cecily had said little during the journey. Martha had tried twice to speak, and twice fallen silent, not because she lacked courage, but because some fears grew larger when named aloud. The note lay on Cecily's lap. The cracked fan rested hidden in her reticule. Between them sat every lesson Hadleigh Close had taught her. Do not presume. Do not complain. Do not let discomfort become visible enough to inconvenience another person. When the carriage stopped before Loxley House, Cecily almost forgot to breathe. The Duke's residence was not the largest house in the square, but it was the one the eye obeyed first. Pale stone rose above black railings. The brass on the door had been polished until the cloudy London light shone in it. A footman opened the carriage door, took in Cecily's grey muslin, Martha's plain servant's cloak, the hired carriage, and the violet-sealed note with one trained glance. His face remained proper. That made the judgment worse, because it could not be challenged. "Your card, miss?" he asked. Cecily held out the letter. Miss Cecily Vane of Hadleigh Close. Lady Beatrice Morland wrote concerning charity ledgers. The footman accepted the note without touching her hand. "One moment, miss." Martha stepped down behind her and whispered, "Stand straight, Miss Cecily. Not for them. For you." Cecily's mouth softened for half a second. "I am standing. You know what I mean, yes?" Cecily thought as the door opened and the cool order of Loxley House received them. She did. The entrance hall was broad and spare, with a dark floor polished to a depth that reflected movement without warmth. Portraits lined the walls, faces of Vale ancestors, who seemed to have been born already knowing where to place their hands and whom to ignore. The butler approached, silver-haired, grave, and so composed that even surprise became invisible in him. "Miss Vane?" "Yes, Lady Beatrice is not presently at home." The sentence struck before Cecily could prepare. Her fingers closed around the reticule. "Then we should not intrude. I can return at another hour." The butler's gaze lowered to the note. Something on its direction must have carried His Grace's name. Lady Maud had planned well. "His Grace is expected shortly," he said. "If you will wait in the drawing-room, that will not be necessary." The butler bowed, which somehow ended the discussion. "This way, miss." Refusal would have looked like guilt. Panic would have looked like confirmation. Cecily followed him because dignity, she had learned, often consisted of walking toward a room one wished to flee. The drawing-room into which she was shown contained more chairs than any person could reasonably need. Chairs with carved backs, chairs near the fire, chairs set for conversation. A small sofa beneath a gilt mirror, a delicate seat beside a table of roses. The abundance became its own insult because the butler did not invite her to take any of them. Perhaps he did not know whether she was guest, clerk, dependent, or mistake. Perhaps Lady Maud's letter had already answered for her. "His Grace will be informed," he said, then withdrew. Martha remained near the door, as proper as a maid could be, while looking ready to fight every footman in London with a bonnet pin. Cecily stood near the table of roses. She did not touch the petals. She did not sit. The journey had stiffened her legs, and the piece of bread she had eaten at dawn felt very far away. Her grey gown, brushed until it could do no more, seemed duller against the pale silk walls. Time began to lengthen. A clock on the mantel ticked with disciplined cruelty. Somewhere in the house, doors opened and closed with the soft confidence of well-trained servants. Martha leaned toward her. "You should sit." "I was not asked. There are 15 chairs. That does not make one mine." The words came too easily. They belonged to Hadleigh. Cecily hated that she had brought them with her. Before Martha could answer, footsteps sounded in the corridor. Measured footsteps, not hurried, not heavy. The kind of steps that made servants arrange themselves before the person arrived. The door opened. Adrian Vale, Duke of Loxley, entered in a dark morning coat, his cravat immaculate, his face so controlled that for one strange instant, Cecily thought emotion had never been permitted near him. He was younger than she had imagined, perhaps in his early 30s, but there was nothing careless in him. His eyes were grey, clear, and sharply observant. The butler followed with the violet sealed note on a salver. The Duke did not take it. He looked at Cecily first, not at the worn edge of her glove, not at the plainness of her gown with amusement, not at Martha as an inconvenience. He looked at Cecily's face, the line of her shoulders, the hand too tightly closed around her reticule, and the slight unsteadiness she had fought to hide. The silence became exact. Cecily curtsied because it was the only thing her body remembered how to do. "Your Grace," he did not answer at once. His gaze moved once to the chairs around the room and back to her. Then he turned his head toward the butler. "Bring Miss Vane a chair." The words were quiet. The room changed anyway. Martha released a breath and disguised it badly as a cough. The butler moved at once, selecting a chair near the fire, not hidden by the wall and not placed like an afterthought. He set it behind Cecily with the same care he might have given a duchess. Cecily stared at it. The kindness was so simple that she did not know how to receive it. She had prepared for mockery, irritation, dismissal, perhaps even laughter. She had not prepared for furniture. "Your Grace, I am able to stand," she said. "I have no doubt," he replied. "Sit." His voice held command, but not contempt. That made obedience harder, not easier. "I would not wish to presume, Miss Vane. If a lady must faint before a room discovers its chairs, the room is at fault." A small tremor went through her. She sat before her knees could betray her further. Relief moved up her body so swiftly that shame followed it. She folded her hands in her lap and tried to make gratitude invisible. The Duke noticed that too. "Tea," he said to the butler, "and something from the breakfast room." "Yes, Your Grace, for Miss Vane's maid as well." Martha's head lifted. "Your Grace, I don't need anything." "Then you may enjoy receiving what you do not need." Cecily looked down quickly, because the corner of her mouth had betrayed her. It vanished when the Duke finally took the note. The violet wax looked vulgar in his hand. He examined the seal before opening it. "Who gave you this?" "Lady Maud Vane, Your Grace. Your mother. My stepmother." Something altered in his expression. It was not surprise. It was adjustment, as if a piece of evidence had found its proper place. "And you were instructed to bring it to me?" "I believed it concerned Lady Beatrice's charity ledgers." "Believed." Cecily drew a careful breath. Lady Maud did not invite questions. The Duke studied her for a moment longer, then broke the seal. The fire made a small settling sound. The mantel clock marked another second. Cecily watched his eyes move across the page. At first, nothing changed in him. Then stillness entered his face more completely than before. He read to the end, folded the paper once, and placed it face down on the table beside him, as if it had lost the right to lie open in decent company. The butler returned with tea, bread, butter, ham, and a small dish of preserves. No one spoke while the tray was arranged. The Duke waited until the servants had stepped back. "Miss Vane," he said, "did you know what this letter contained?" Cecily's fingers tightened against her gloves. "No, Your Grace, I believe you." 2 words, no flourish, no softening. no performance of generosity. They struck her harder than comfort would have done. She had been doubted for smaller things than ignorance. She had been corrected for truths. To be believed at once felt almost dangerous. "If the letter has caused offense," she said, "I will leave immediately." She began to rise. The Duke's gaze stopped her before his words did. "No." Cecily remained half-lifted from the chair. "Your Grace," his voice lowered, not in intimacy but in absolute control. "The offense did not enter this house with you." Martha made a small sound near the door. Cecily sat again, slowly, because something in the room had shifted beyond etiquette. The Duke turned to the butler. "No servant in this house is to speak of Miss Vane's arrival, her appearance, her errand, or this letter. If anyone is unable to govern his tongue, he may seek employment where vulgarity is better paid." "Yes, Your Grace." The butler bowed, but Cecily saw respect deepen in the movement. The Duke looked back at her. "You will take tea before any decision is made. I do not wish to impose. That is not an answer to hunger." "I'm not hungry," she said, because dialogue allowed the lie to come quickly. His eyes moved to the untouched bread, then to her face. "Then prove your strength by eating, not by refusing." It should have offended her. Instead, she took a small piece of bread, because the room had become too truthful for pride to survive entirely. Adrian Vale watched her not as a man amused by weakness, but as one carefully measuring harm without naming it too soon. "Lady Beatrice will return later today," he said. "Until then, propriety requires caution. You cannot remain here under my roof without suitable protection, and I will not send you back to a house that dispatched you under false pretenses, unless you choose it." Cecily looked up. "Choose?" The word sounded unfamiliar in that context. "Yes, Miss Vane, choose." The violet note lay between them, folded and silent. For the first time since leaving Hadleigh Close, Cecily realized the letter had not succeeded completely. It had brought her humiliation to Loxley House. But it had also brought her before a man who had read cruelty and refused to mistake it for truth. Cecily had heard many silences in her life, but the silence that followed the Duke's words was the first that did not seem to be waiting for her apology. At Hadleigh Close, silence was a punishment. It followed a correction from Lady Maud, a laugh from Florence, a bill mentioned too plainly, or a servant defended too quickly. It pressed until Cecily lowered her eyes and accepted blame for disturbing everyone's comfort. In Loxley House, silence arranged itself differently. It stood behind the Duke's judgment like a wall. The violet-sealed letter lay folded on the table, face down, as if Adrian Vale had decided that even paper could be made indecent by the hand that wrote upon it. Cecily sat near the fire with a plate before her, one piece of bread broken but barely eaten. Martha remained near the door, rigid with concern and fierce loyalty, while the silver-haired butler waited for instruction. Adrian did not look at the letter again. He looked at Cecily, and for once she did not feel examined for defect. She felt observed for injury. That was worse in a different way. It made her want to explain everything and deny everything at the same time. "Your Grace," she said, because words were easier when shaped by habit. "I am sorry that Lady Maud presumed upon your household." His expression changed very little. That sounded practiced. Heat rose in her face. "I beg your pardon," the apology. "You reached for it before the offense had been named." Cecily lowered her eyes to her gloves. The right thumb had been darned so neatly that she had hoped no one would notice. He had noticed. He noticed everything. One learns what prevents difficulty, or one learns to carry difficulty that belongs to others. She had no safe answer to that. The Duke turned his head slightly. Bracket. The butler stepped forward. "Your Grace, the letter Miss Vane brought will not be read aloud. Its contents will not be repeated in the servants' hall, the pantry, the stable yard, or any room attached to this house by key, door, or rumor. Is that understood?" "Perfectly, Your Grace. If anyone asks why Miss Vane came, the answer is simple. She was received as a gentlewoman on a matter connected to Lady Beatrice's charity ledgers." "Yes, Your Grace." Cecily's breath caught. "Received as a gentlewoman." The words were plain, but they opened something inside her that hurt, because it had been locked too long. Martha looked down quickly, and Cecily knew the older maid was fighting tears. Adrian continued, his voice level. If any servant finds speculation irresistible, he may leave my employment before supper. I prefer incompetence in a footman to vulgarity. Incompetence can sometimes be trained. I shall make it clear, Your Grace. Brackett bowed, but there was no resentment in the motion. The Duke's authority did not need theatre. It simply made a fact of what lesser people would have shouted. When the butler withdrew, Cecily sat very still. She had been sent to be made ridiculous. Instead, a household was being ordered to protect her from ridicule. She did not know how to hold that without trembling. Your Grace, she began, then stopped because gratitude felt dangerous and pride felt dishonest. You need not thank me for refusing to assist cruelty, he said. Her eyes lifted before she could prevent it. Most people would have called it family humor. Most people are cowards in company. It should have sounded arrogant. Perhaps it was arrogant. Yet it was also true enough to steady her. Martha shifted near the door. Adrian noticed at once. Your maid should eat properly. Martha stiffened. I'm well enough, Your Grace. That is not what I said. Cecily looked at Martha. You should go. I won't leave you if you don't wish it. The Duke turned to Cecily, not Martha. Do you wish her to remain? The question was so simple that Cecily nearly missed its importance. He was not sending Martha away. He was asking. Lady Maud issued kindness like a bill to be paid later. Adrian Vale offered choice as if it were ordinary. Martha, Cecily said softly, please go with Mrs. Rowe if she is available. Eat something. I will be all right. Martha searched her face. You're certain? I am. Then I will stay within call. That is acceptable, Adrian said. Brackett will see to it. Martha curtsied, reluctant but relieved, and followed the butler into the corridor. The door remained properly ajar after she left. Cecily noticed that too, and so did the Duke. You need not fear impropriety here, he said. I fear its appearance more than its reality. A sensible distinction. He moved to the escritoire by the window and drew out a sheet of heavy paper. I will write to Lady Maud. Cecily stood so quickly the chair legs gave a small scrape against the carpet. Please do not. Adrian paused, pen in hand. Why? Because she will not bear correction quietly. I did not intend to correct her quietly. That is what concerns me. His eyes narrowed, not in anger at her, but in attention. Cecily forced herself to continue. If she is humiliated, she will not suffer the humiliation herself. Martha may, Mr. Ellery may. Any servant who is near enough to punish and poor enough not to protest. The Duke set the pen down. For the first time his stillness looked less like restraint and more like controlled fury. You speak from experience. I speak from living in her house. Your father left Hadleigh Close to Lady Maud's management. My father left many things unclear. She regretted the sentence as soon as she spoke it. It revealed too much. Adrian heard what she did not say. Including your position there. Cecily looked toward the roses on the table. I have a bed, food, and employment enough to be called useful. Lady Maud would say many women have less. Does she often measure your gratitude by the suffering of women worse treated? The question went through her cleanly. Lady Maud had done exactly that for years. You are not in the workhouse, Cecily. You are not a scullery maid, Cecily. You are not destitute, Cecily. Every reminder had made poverty into a favor and silence into rent. Yes, Cecily said. The word was nearly soundless. Adrian picked up the pen again. Then, my reply must leave her less room to pass injury downward. Can a letter do that? A careful one can begin. He wrote without asking her to look away. His hand was swift, the lines controlled, the wording brief. When he finished, he sanded the page, waited, then read it aloud. Lady Maud Vane, Miss Cecily Vane, has been received at Loxley House with the courtesy due to a gentlewoman. Lady Beatrice being temporarily absent, Miss Vane will be placed under her ladyship's protection until arrangements are made in a manner suitable to Miss Vane's dignity and convenience. I trust no further confusion will arise regarding the manner in which she is to be spoken of or sent in connection with my house. Loxley. Cecily listened to the words with growing disbelief. There was no accusation Lady Maud could theatrically deny, no tender phrase she could mock, no claim over Cecily that would create scandal. Yet every line stood like iron beneath silk. "She will hate that," Cecily said. "Yes, she will know you understood. Yes, and that was your intention. Entirely." A tremor, not quite fear and not quite laughter, moved through Cecily's chest. "You make enemies very calmly. It prevents them from mistaking noise for power." He folded the letter, sealed it with dark wax, and rang for Brackett. When the butler came, Adrian placed the reply on the salver. "By my own rider to Hadleigh Close, directly to Lady Maud Vane." "Yes, Your Grace, then send to Lady Beatrice. Tell her Miss Vane requires a proper chaperone and a quiet room. Also tell her I have found the discretion she requested, though not in the form she expected." Brackett accepted both instructions without visible surprise. When he left, the room felt larger. Cecily looked at the violet note, still locked beneath the weight of the Duke's palm. "May I know what she wrote?" Adrian's eyes returned to her. "You may. But I would not advise reading it today. Because it would hurt me. Because it was designed to." She absorbed the difference. "I do not want to be protected by ignorance. Nor should you be." He took the note, crossed to the escritoire, and placed it inside a drawer. He did not turn the key. "It remains here for now. When you wish to read it, you shall. Until then, it will not be allowed to perform its purpose." Cecily sat again, because the strength that had carried her from Hadleigh was thinning. "I do not know what to do with kindness that does not ask to be admired. You need do nothing with it." His voice was quieter now. "That is generally how one recognizes it." She looked at him then, truly looked, and saw not softness but discipline turned toward mercy. He was not gentle in the way poets meant the word. He was too exact, too cold at the edges, too accustomed to being obeyed. Yet when he saw harm, he did not decorate it. He named it by refusing to assist it. "If I go to Lady Beatrice," Cecily said, "it must be understood that I am not accepting charity. Then call it propriety, and if Lady Maud demands my return, you may choose whether to go." The word returned. Choose. It felt fragile, like a cup too fine for daily use. "She will say I have been influenced." "She already has. You do not know that. Miss Vane, I have met people like Lady Maud." A faint dryness entered his voice. "They accuse others of influence when their own fails." Against every intention, Cecily almost smiled. He saw it and looked away, as if granting her privacy even from amusement. That courtesy undid her more than sympathy would have. Within the hour, Martha returned fed and flustered, insisting the housekeeper had treated her like a visiting aunt with an apron, and Cecily's small trunk was transferred from the carriage. Loxley House moved around them with efficient discretion. No servant stared, no footman smirked, no whisper followed loudly enough to be heard. When the carriage was prepared to take Cecily to Lady Beatrice Morland's townhouse, Adrian escorted her only to the hall, where the front door stood open, and propriety breathed easily around them. "Miss Vane," he said. She curtsied. "Your Grace." There should have been nothing more, yet as she turned toward the steps, his voice stopped her. "One thing," she looked back. He stood beneath the portraits of his ancestors, dark and composed, holding all the authority Lady Maud had tried to borrow for cruelty, and using none of it to make himself grand. "If Lady Maud taught you endurance is the same as worth," he said. "She taught you badly." Cecily carried those words into the carriage like contraband. Beside her, Martha held her hands tightly in her lap, still overwhelmed by food, warmth, and outrage. The wheels began to turn toward Lady Beatrice's house. Behind them, somewhere on the road to Hampshire, the Duke's rider carried a dark sealed reply to Hadleigh Close. Lady Maud had sent a joke to London. By evening, she would learn that London had answered without laughing. By the following afternoon, Cecily had discovered that Lady Beatrice Morland's townhouse did not offer comfort in the usual way. It did not soothe, it corrected. The house stood on a quiet London street, behind black railings and window boxes, filled with primroses, its rooms smaller than those of Loxley House, warmer and far less obedient to fashion. Books lay where a lesser hostess would have placed porcelain. A silver-handled walking stick rested beside a chair, as if prepared to strike foolishness from the carpet. 2 spaniels slept before the fire, with the serene arrogance of creatures who had never been asked to earn their place. Lady Beatrice herself wore dark plum silk, a lace cap, and an expression that made unnecessary apology feel like a personal insult to her intelligence. She had received Cecily the previous evening, with one sharp glance, one brisk order for food, and no questions until Cecily's hands stopped trembling around her teacup. That restraint had unsettled Cecily more than interrogation might have done. At Hadleigh Close, questions were traps. In Lady Beatrice's house, silence appeared to be a courtesy one was expected to use wisely. Now Cecily sat in the morning room with a small tray untouched beside her, and Lady Beatrice studying the Duke's brief account, through spectacles balanced low on her nose. Martha had been given a proper chamber, near enough to be summoned, which had moved her to indignation on behalf of all maids less fortunate. "My nephew writes very little when he is enraged," Lady Beatrice said at last. "This letter is practically a thunderstorm." Cecily looked down. "I did not mean to cause difficulty between His Grace and Lady Maud." "My dear, Lady Maud caused difficulty when she mistook cruelty for wit. You merely survived the delivery. The words were too clean to dispute." Cecily folded her hands. She will have received his reply by now. Indeed. Lady Beatrice tapped the paper. Adrian sent it by his own rider. If the man changed horses properly, it reached Hadleigh late last night. I imagine Lady Maud slept badly, if Justice has any manners left. She will come. Of course she will. Cecily looked up quickly. You expected it. A woman who has ruled by making others small cannot endure hearing that one of them was received as a gentlewoman. She will wish to take you back before that sentence grows legs. Lady Beatrice removed her spectacles. The question is whether you wish to be taken. Cecily's mouth went dry. I do not know what I wish. An honest beginning, far better than most. I know what I fear. Most women do. Fewer are asked what they choose. Cecily looked toward the window. London moved beyond the glass in muffled wheels and distant calls, a city large enough to hide her, and yet not large enough to protect her reputation if Lady Maud decided to weaponize it. If I stay, she will say I am ungrateful. If I return, she will say I was corrected. Either way, she will tell the story. Lady Beatrice's eyes sharpened. Then begin by refusing to let her tell it in your voice. Before Cecily could answer, the front bell rang with a force that made both spaniels lift their heads. Lady Beatrice did not move. There she is. Promptness is sometimes only panic dressed for calling. Mrs. Finch appeared at the door a moment later, composed but alert. Lady Maud Vane has called, my lady. Miss Florence Vane accompanies her. Cecily's breath caught. Martha, who had been standing near the tea table, turned pale with anger. Lady Beatrice rose slowly, not because she was weak, but because she wanted the room to understand she had chosen the exact speed. Show them in. Martha, you may remain if Miss Vane wishes it. Martha looked at Cecily. The choice landed softly and firmly. Cecily had been given more choices in one day than in several years at Hadleigh Close. Please stay, she said. Martha moved behind her chair. Lady Maud entered in black silk, softened by expensive lace, looking every inch the daughter of an earl and the wronged widow of a baronet. Florence followed in pale green, bright and fresh, with a face arranged into concern that did not reach her eyes. Lady Maud's gaze went first to Cecily's chair, then to the tray beside her, then to Martha standing behind it. Each detail seemed to offend her because it proved Cecily had been treated as someone whose comfort mattered. Lady Beatrice, she said, curtsying with perfect grace. How kind of you to receive us at such short notice. Not kindness, Lady Beatrice replied. Curiosity. They are often mistaken by callers. Florence's smile faltered. Lady Maud's did not. I came as soon as I received His Grace's extraordinary letter. You must imagine my distress. Cecily was sent on a harmless errand, and has somehow been made to believe herself injured. Cecily felt the old command in the sentence. Be embarrassed. Apologize. Return the room to comfort. She kept her hands still. Lady Beatrice sat. How efficient of you to travel from Hampshire so quickly. A mother's concerns is not governed by distance, nor, apparently, by accuracy. Lady Maud turned towards Cecily, softening her voice. My dear child, you have frightened everyone at Hadleigh. Florence scarcely slept. Florence lowered her eyes obediently. I was so worried, Cecily. You know how easily things become confused when you are overwrought. Martha made a tiny sound. Cecily did not look back. I was not confused when I arrived at Loxley House. Lady Maud's face tightened by one careful degree. You arrived in a state of nerves, carrying a private note you had no need to interpret. I did not interpret it. His Grace did. His Grace is a gentleman. Gentlemen are sometimes severe when they misunderstand domestic matters. Lady Beatrice's walking stick touched the carpet once. My nephew rarely misunderstands malice. He has too much experience with society. Florence stepped forward. No one meant malice. Mama only wished to make light of a tiresome situation. Cecily takes everything so solemnly. Cecily turned to her. Being sent to a duke's house as an object of amusement is not a small matter to the person being sent. Florence's cheeks colored. Lady Maud's eyes sharpened, but her voice remained smooth. You see, Lady Beatrice, this is what I feared. Since Sir Edmund's death, Cecily has struggled with perspective. She is useful in accounts, yes, but she has always been inclined to mistake correction for persecution. The lie was not new. What was new was hearing it in front of someone who did not accept the rhythm. Lady Beatrice looked at Cecily. Do you wish to return with Lady Maud? The room seemed to stop. Lady Maud's hand stilled on her reticule. Florence blinked. Martha's breath caught behind the chair. Cecily heard the question echo through years of rooms where no one had asked. She thought of the grey muslin, the violet seal, Martha's threatened place, the chair at Loxley House, and the dark wax travelling back to Hadleigh, like an answer written by someone who had seen. No, she said. The word was quiet. It did not break. Lady Maud stared at her. Florence whispered, Cecily, don't be foolish. I do not wish to return today, Cecily said. Lady Maud's face altered. Not much. Enough. You will make yourself conspicuous. I was made conspicuous without my consent. You are being influenced. By whom? Cecily asked. A woman who offered me tea? A duke who offered me a chair, or a room where I was asked what I wished. Silence fell. Lady Beatrice smiled only with her eyes. Before Lady Maud could answer, the parlour door opened and Adrian Vale entered, dark coat damp at the shoulders from a passing shower, hat in hand, his expression so composed that the room seemed to gather itself around him. He bowed first to his aunt, then to Lady Maud. Lady Maud, your Grace. Her curtsy was flawless. Her colour was not. Florence dipped beautifully, but Adrian's attention moved past her to Cecily, not possessive, not dramatic, only confirming. She was still seated by choice. I was told Miss Vane's removal had become urgent, he said. Lady Maud's smile was delicate. Your Grace, you must forgive a family's anxiety. My stepdaughter belongs at Hadleigh. People do not belong to houses, Adrian said. They reside in them when treated well enough to remain. Florence's lips parted. Lady Maud recovered quickly. A noble sentiment, yet Cecily has little understanding of what it costs to maintain a family's standing. On the contrary, Adrian replied, I suspect she understands cost very well. Others may have kept the receipts. The words struck some hidden place. Cecily saw it happen. Lady Maud's gaze flicked toward him, and for the first time alarm showed before polish covered it. I cannot imagine what your Grace means. Nor can I fully, Adrian said. Not yet. He placed his hat on a side table. But my father's solicitor once corresponded with a man connected to Sir Edmund Vane, Mr. Pember Dane. The name came back to me after Miss Vane's arrival. The room changed. It was not a gasp or a movement large enough to be named. It was Lady Maud becoming too still. Florence looked at her mother. Mamma, old solicitors are not unusual in old families, Lady Maud said. No, Adrian replied, but fear of their names is more distinctive. Cecily's heart beat once, hard. Pember Dane. She had heard it before, or thought she had, somewhere behind a door after her mother's death, in Martha's hushed voice, and her father's weary reply. The memory was too faint to hold, but not faint enough to dismiss. Lady Beatrice leaned back, satisfied and dangerous. Miss Vane will remain under my roof. Tomorrow she may assist with the charity ledgers I requested. After that we shall see what old names remember. Lady Maud turned to Cecily. All softness had left her eyes. You will regret allowing strangers to meddle in family matters. Cecily's hand tightened on the arm of her chair. For years, that look had been enough to move her. Today, it met witnesses. Perhaps, Cecily said, but I did not ask to be sent. Lady Maud flinched because the sentence had escaped the walls that once kept her safe. Within minutes, she and Florence were gone, their carriage wheels striking the street with offended speed. Cecily remained seated until the sound faded. Only then did she realize she had not stood to follow. Lady Beatrice poured tea as if she had merely survived a dull call. Well, she said, that woman is hiding something heavy enough to bend her manners. Adrian looked at Cecily, and this time his question was not whether she needed a chair. It was whether she was ready to learn why Lady Maud had been so afraid of a dead solicitor's name. Cecily did not sleep deeply in Lady Beatrice's house, but for the first time in many years she woke without listening for Lady Maud's bell. That difference seemed so small that she almost distrusted it. Morning entered through muslin curtains in a pale wash of London light, touching the blue counterpane, the little writing desk, and the blue chair placed near the hearth, as if someone had assumed she might wish to sit before being useful. The room had been prepared with the quiet confidence of a household that did not consider warmth an extravagance. Martha came in carrying chocolate and toast with an expression of grave triumph. Mrs. Finch says you're to eat before anyone asks you to think, she announced. Cecily pushed herself upright. That sounds like Lady Beatrice's law. It's a good one. Martha set down the tray and eyed her with a tenderness made brisk by long practice. You look less pale. That is because no one has corrected my complexion yet. Give London time. Cecily almost laughed. It felt strange enough that she touched the edge of the tray to steady herself. After breakfast, Lady Beatrice summoned her to the morning room, where the charity ledgers had been stacked on a table by the window. The spaniels slept near the fire, indifferent to philanthropy. Lady Beatrice sat with a pencil in one hand and irritation in the other, disguised as a list of names. These accounts are the reason I wrote to Lady Maud, she said. The committee insists the errors are innocent. Innocence, in my experience, is often poor arithmetic wearing white gloves. Cecily took the chair indicated, not quite without hesitation, but with less shame than yesterday. You wished me to copy them. I wished you to read them. Copying errors only gives them better handwriting. Cecily opened the first ledger. The familiar lines of ink, date, sum, and description quieted her. Numbers did not flatter. They did not pretend kindness while moving money elsewhere. They betrayed human behavior only when one knew where to look. At Hadleigh, she had learned to follow small disobediences in columns because large ones were always denied. Within a quarter hour, she had found 3 duplicated carriage expenses, 1 payment entered under the wrong parish, and a subscription credited before the donor's draft had cleared. Lady Beatrice watched over the rim of her spectacles. You do not guess. Guessing is how accounts become fiction. Excellent. I dislike fiction when it asks for my signature. Cecily turned another page. This entry is not merely misplaced. The amount is too round. Too round? Real expenses have awkwardness. Soap, coal, linen, repairs. They seldom end so prettily unless someone has decided the eye prefers order. Lady Beatrice's lips twitched. My dear, you speak of arithmetic as though it has moral failings. It often reveals them. The door opened before Lady Beatrice could reply. Adrian Vale entered with Brackett behind him, carrying a dispatch case. Cecily rose at once. The Duke stopped halfway into the room. Please do not stand on my account if the figures are in the middle of confessing. Lady Beatrice pointed with her pencil. Sit, Cecily. My nephew already owns enough houses. He does not need your chair too. Cecily sat, aware of Adrian's gaze, and of the fact that he had noticed the hesitation, but chosen not to make it visible. He bowed to his aunt, then to Cecily with a formality that steadied the room instead of claiming it. "Miss Vane, your Grace Brackett," set the dispatch case down and withdrew. Adrian placed several letters on the side table. "I have sent an inquiry regarding Mr. Pemberdane. There is reason to believe he still practices, though perhaps no longer, daily." His clerk answered an old address connected to Chancery Lane. Cecily's hand tightened around the ledger page. So quickly. Old names tend to leave traces when people have tried not to mention them. Lady Beatrice leaned back. A deeply inconvenient habit. Adrian looked toward the ledgers. "Has Miss Vane found your missing discretion? She has found duplicated carriage charges, and a sum too round to be honest. I am beginning to consider adopting her, and making her terrify treasurers. A wise ambition." His eyes moved to Cecily. "You have experience with household accounts." "Some," Lady Beatrice snorted. "Some. That means she has kept Hadleigh Close breathing, while Lady Maud bought Florence enough ribbon to restrain a regiment." Cecily looked down at the page. "It was not my household." "No," Adrian said quietly. "Only your labor." The words did not accuse her. They placed weight where it belonged. Cecily felt the old impulse to defend Lady Maud out of habit, or perhaps to reduce the discomfort of being seen. She resisted it. The accounts had to be kept. "And were you paid for keeping them?" Lady Beatrice asked. "I had a room. So does my spaniel." "He has never balanced a ledger in his life." Cecily's mouth moved before she could stop it. "Perhaps he has better terms." Lady Beatrice laughed outright. The sound startled one spaniel awake. Adrian did not laugh, but warmth touched his eyes so briefly that Cecily looked away, unprepared for the effect of pleasing him. He crossed to the table, maintaining the distance propriety required, and examined the columns she had marked. "This is precise. It is simple once one stops trusting headings. Many people never stop. Then many people are easier to rob than they imagine." Silence followed. The sentence had come too plainly. It opened the door to Hadleigh, to Lady Maud's pale face when Pemberdane's name had been spoken, to Florence's gowns recorded beneath necessities. Cecily reached for her reticule, needing the familiar pressure of something that belonged to her. The reticule slipped from her lap and struck the floor. The cracked pearl-handled fan slid out halfway, its faded silk catching on the clasp. Cecily bent at once, but Adrian was closer. He stepped back instead of reaching first. That restraint was so complete that it gave her the courage to lift the fan herself. As she did, one loosened strip near the broken guard shifted. A thread caught on the reticule clasp, and a narrow piece of old silk slid free from beneath the pearl. It fell onto the ledger page like a secret tired of hiding. No one spoke. The strip was no wider than 2 fingers, and faded to the color of weak tea. Ink marked it in a hand so fine that Cecily knew before she read it that it belonged to a woman who had expected the words to survive her. E.V. March 3rd, 1824. Pemberdane. The room grew still. Cecily sat with the fan in one hand and the silk in the other, unable to make the letters become ordinary. E.V. Eleanor Vane, her mother's initials. Her mother's hand, perhaps. Her mother's date. A date 2 weeks before death had turned into a whispered fact behind closed doors. "Cecily," Lady Beatrice said, and for once there was no sharpness in her voice. "May I?" Cecily handed her the silk, because if she held it longer she feared she might press it to her heart like a child. Lady Beatrice read it and passed it to Adrian. He did not touch the writing with his bare fingers. He took the edges with care. "March 3rd, he said. "A legal date, perhaps." "A settlement?" Lady Beatrice asked. "Possibly. A trust." "A copy instruction. An appointment with Dane." Cecily heard the words from a distance. Trust, settlement, copy. Independence might have had a date. Her mother might have known she was dying, and tried to place something in the world for her child to find. That possibility hurt more than despair. Despair had been familiar. Hope arrived like proof that every year of dependence had not been natural, not deserved, not merely unfortunate. If Eleanor had tried to protect her, then someone else had let that protection vanish. "I thought," Cecily said and stopped. Adrian's attention came to her at once. What did you think? She looked at the fan. The crack in the pearl guard seemed darker now, no longer a blemish but a seam. I thought my mother left me memory. A few pieces, a fan, a song Martha hums when she forgets I can hear. I did not think she might have left me anything that could alter a life. Lady Beatrice's expression softened in a way that made her look older and kinder than she would have permitted anyone to say. Mothers often hide strength where children later mistake it for sentiment. Cecily closed the fan carefully. If this is what Lady Maud feared, she knows more than she said. Yes, Adrian said. The single word did not soften the truth. It made it safe to stand beside. Cecily looked at him. You wrote to Mr. Dane. I sent inquiry only. If he answers, I want to read it. You shall all of it, not a summary prepared to spare me. All of it, he said. If there are accounts, I want to see them. If there are letters, I want to see those too. If my mother was mistaken, I must know that. If she was not, I must know that more. Adrian held her gaze. I will not keep your truth from you. Lady Beatrice nodded once, satisfied. Good, I have always found concealed truth develops a dreadful odor. Cecily tries to smile, but her eyes stung. She placed the fan on the table beside the charity ledger. The two objects looked strange together, one delicate and broken, the other practical and stern. Yet both had begun to speak in the same language. Dates, names, missing sums. Women made small by people who benefited from their silence. Adrian glanced toward the window, where London carried on beyond the glass, as if no hidden door had opened. I will send a second message to Chancery Lane. More urgent this time. Because of the silk? Cecily asked. Because Lady Maud came yesterday within hours of receiving my reply, and because the name Pember Dane frightened her before she knew what we had found. Lady Beatrice tapped the ledger. And because Miss Vane has just proved she can read what others hoped would remain buried. Cecily touched the edge of the fan. For years, she had thought Hadleigh Close had taken her life by inches through scolding, economy, and humiliation so ordinary that no one would call it harm. Now a strip of silk suggested something colder. Perhaps the theft had begun with paper. Perhaps her mother had known. Perhaps the cracked fan had not been a relic after all, but a message waiting for the one daughter no one expected to search. The thought should have terrified her. It did. But beneath the terror, small and bright as a pin of light under a door, came resolve. Then we must find out what my mother trusted Mr. Dane to keep, she said. Adrian bowed his head, not to command the investigation, but to acknowledge hers. Yes, Miss Vane, we must. The invitation arrived before luncheon, folded in pale paper and scented faintly of lavender, as if fragrance could disguise anxiety. Lady Beatrice read it once, made a sound that caused both spaniels to open their eyes, and passed it to Cecily across the morning-room table. Lady Harbury has discovered that the Charity Committee requires your assistance after all. Cecily took the note carefully. The writing was gracious, the phrases polished until they shone with reluctance. Lady Harbury would be honored if Miss Vane might attend a small review of the subscription accounts that afternoon. Lady Beatrice's presence would be most welcome. The word small meant observed. The word welcome meant unavoidable. Cecily knew because Lady Maud had used language that way for years, shaping courtesies into narrow passages one could not walk without being measured. Lady Maud will be there, Cecily said. Undoubtedly, and Florence, unless she has developed an allergy to superiority. Cecily set the note down. The strip of silk from her mother's fan lay wrapped safely in tissue upstairs, but its message had followed her into every room. E.V. March 3, 1824. Pember Dane. The date made ordinary conversation feel thin. She had wanted answers from Mr. Dane, not another gathering of ladies prepared to smile while choosing sides. Yet Lady Harbury's committee was not separate from the mystery. The charity ledgers had already shown one false entry tied to Florence's music master. Public accounts and private theft might not be different sins. They might be the same habit practiced on different paper. You need not go, Lady Beatrice said. Need is a word tyrants overuse. I offer choice. Cecily looked toward the window, where London's afternoon was bright enough to be unkind to tired faces. If I do not go, Lady Maud will say I was afraid to be seen. If you do go, she will say you were eager for notice. Then she will speak either way. Yes, Lady Beatrice's voice gentled without becoming soft. The question is whether she speaks in a room where you are absent. Cecily thought of standing in Loxley House among chairs she had not dared to claim. She thought of the Duke saying, "Bring Miss Vane a chair," before the letter had told him what Lady Maud wished him to see. She thought of the fan opening like a small wound in the morning light. "I will go," she said. "Not to prove I am innocent." Lady Beatrice looked pleased. "No, to prove I am not invisible." Lady Harbury's house in Portman Square had been arranged for virtue to look expensive. The drawing room was full of gilt-framed mirrors, embroidered screens, and women whose bonnets had been chosen with more care than many household budgets. A long table stood near the windows, covered with account books, subscription lists, and little cards bearing names of donors. Cecily entered behind Lady Beatrice and felt conversation alter without stopping. That was society's cruelest skill. It could look away while staring. Lady Harbury came forward with a smile too quick at the corners. "Lady Beatrice, how very good. Miss Vane, we are grateful for your willingness." Cecily curtsied. "I am happy to be useful, Lady Harbury. How admirable." From the far side of the room, Florence's voice floated like a ribbon over a blade. "Cecily has always been useful when there are columns to read. Poverty teaches adaptability, does it not?" A few women lowered their eyes. Lady Maud stood beside Florence in black silk with lilac gloves, looking composed enough to be carved. Her gaze moved over Cecily's grey muslin and paused on the reticule that held the cracked fan. "My stepdaughter is generous with her small talents," she said. "One must encourage young women to feel valued where one can." The insult was neat. Small talents, feel valued, not be valued. Cecily felt it land and remain on the surface. Yesterday it would have entered. Lady Beatrice leaned on her stick. How fortunate, then, that Miss Vane brought talents large enough to inconvenience everyone. Lady Harbury laughed because she was not sure whether she had been given permission not to. "Shall we begin?" Chairs had been placed along the table for committee members. Lady Harbury took the head. Lady Maud sat to her right. Florence slipped into a chair near the subscription book, though she held no office in the committee. Mrs. Alderley, a widow with a severe cap and intelligent eyes, occupied a place near the window. Other ladies settled. Cecily waited. No chair remained at the table. A footstool stood near the fireplace. A narrow side chair had been left by the screen, several feet away from the ledgers. Lady Harbury looked distressed in a way that required effort. "Oh dear, we seem to have miscounted." Florence tilted her head. "Cecily does not mind standing. She is accustomed to helping." The room held its breath politely. Cecily looked at the ledgers on the table. Her task was there, her body was here. The old lesson rose. Accept the side place. Do not make the room uncomfortable. Earn permission by endurance. Then the door opened. Adrian Vale entered with the lack of haste that made haste unnecessary in everyone else. Lady Harbury rose half an inch from her chair and then thought better of it. "We did not expect the honour. Lady Beatrice informed me the committee was reviewing accounts connected to my aunt's patronage." His gaze passed over the room and found Cecily standing beside the screen. He took in the table, the occupied chairs, the footstool, and Florence's pleased stillness. No anger crossed his face. That made the silence sharper. He crossed to the wall, selected a chair with carved arms, and placed it at the table between Lady Beatrice's empty place and Mrs. Alderley. Then he turned to Cecily. "Miss Vane." He did not say more. He did not need to. Cecily walked to the chair and sat. The movement was small. The room received it as if a window had been opened during a storm. Lady Beatrice took the chair beside her and announced, "Now that civilization has been restored, shall we pretend this is about orphans again, Mrs.?" Alderley made a sound dangerously close to a laugh. Lady Maud's smile held, but her fingers tightened on her gloves. Lady Harbury shuffled papers. "We are concerned only with clarity. An admirable concern, Adrian said. Miss Vane, what do you see? He had asked her before the committee did. That mattered. Cecily drew the nearest ledger toward her, aware of every eye, every expectation that she would falter, every old fear eager to serve Lady Maud one last time. The first page was subscriptions. The second listed disbursements. Her mind settled as ink became pattern. This transport charge appears twice, she said. Same carrier, same amount, different parish. Lady Harbury blinked. A copyist's error, surely, perhaps, but the second entry is dated before the first delivery was approved. Mrs. Alderley leaned forward. Show me. Cecily turned the ledger. The widow examined the page, then nodded once. She is correct. Lady Maud's voice remained smooth. Minor irregularities are common in charitable work. Good intentions do not always keep tidy books. Cecily did not look up. Good intentions should dislike being charged twice. A silence followed. Then Mrs. Alderley said, Very well put. Florence shifted. Cecily turned another page. Here is a subscription credited to Lady Harbury before her draft was received. Lady Harbury flushed. That cannot be. I paid on Tuesday. The ledger credits Monday. Lady Beatrice looked at the ceiling. How prophetic of the committee. Cecily continued before anyone could turn wit into distraction. This entry is more troubling. Educational instruction for parish children, 3 guineas, the name attached, is Mr. Valen. Florence's fan stopped moving. Lady Maud's eyes sharpened. Cecily felt the change and followed it. Mr. Valen is Florence's music master. Lady Harbury looked between them. Is he? Florence gave a small laugh. He teaches several people. Does he teach parish children? Cecily asked. Florence's colour rose. How should I know? Because the charity paid him. Lady Maud intervened. Cecily, do take care. You have no training to accuse gentlemen of impropriety. I have not accused him. I have read his name. With your usual eagerness to imagine disgrace. Cecily looked at her then, not sharply. Steadily. I learned accounts by correcting household entries no one else wished to read. If disgrace appears there, I did not invent it. Mrs. Alderley held out her hand. The ledger, Miss Vane. Cecily passed it. The older woman reviewed the entry, then the supporting receipt beneath it. Her mouth tightened. This is not a parish instruction receipt. This is private tuition. Lady Harbury put a hand to her throat. There must have been confusion. There was, Mrs. Alderley said. But not by Miss Vane. The room rearranged itself again, not visibly but unmistakably. Women who had avoided Cecily's eyes now glanced at her with calculation of a different sort. Competence had entered the room wearing grey muslin. It was harder to laugh at someone who had just prevented one from signing a false account. Adrian remained standing near the mantel. He had not rescued her from the ledger. He had only moved the chair within reach of it. That distinction travelled through Cecily with quiet force. Lady Maud heard it too, though no one had spoken. She turned to Lady Harbury. I am sure Miss Vane has done her best. Yet such matters should be examined by men of business, not by a young woman whose family circumstances may incline her to severity. Mrs. Alderley closed the ledger. I have employed 2 men of business in my life, Lady Maud. One was honest and dull. The other was clever and expensive. Miss Vane is clearer than both. Lady Beatrice smiled. Careful, Mrs. Alderley, you will make her fashionable. Florence rose abruptly. Mamma, I feel a little warm. Sit down, Florence, Lady Maud said too softly. Florence sat, humiliated by obedience. Cecily marked the disputed entries with slips of paper, each movement careful, each breath measured. She felt no triumph. Triumph would have been too simple. What she felt was stranger. Space. A little more space inside her own body, as if the room could not compress her quite as easily as before. Lady Harbury agreed under Mrs. Alderley's firm guidance that the accounts would be reviewed again before any report was signed. Mr. Valen's receipt would be traced. The duplicated transport charge would be corrected. All future disbursements would require clearer notation. None of those phrases named Lady Maud. None needed to. When the meeting ended, several ladies approached Cecily with thanks carefully phrased to avoid admitting earlier insult. Mrs. Alderley came last. You have a good head for figures, Miss Vane. Thank you, ma'am. Do not let anyone convince you that precision is unbecoming in a lady. It is only unbecoming to those who profit from vagueness. She moved away before Cecily could answer. Adrian stepped closer, though not close enough for gossip. You did well. I read what was there. Many people refuse to see what is there. His voice held pride, restrained but unmistakable. Cecily lowered her eyes because it reached her more deeply than praise should. Across the room, Florence saw the look before Cecily did. She saw the Duke of Loxley watching her plain, useful cousin, not with pity, not with obligation, but with respect. The discovery wounded her vanity more sharply than any accusation in the ledger. Lady Maud saw Florence's face, and for one brief moment mother and daughter understood the same threat. Cecily had not merely been given a chair, she had begun to occupy it. Lady Harbury's musicale began with candlelight, harp strings, and the particular kind of kindness that made Cecily wish she had been warned to wear armor beneath her grey silk. The grey gown was not the old muslin. Lady Beatrice had insisted on a better dress after the committee meeting, not extravagant, not fashionable enough to invite ridicule, but cut cleanly and fitted so well that Cecily had stared at herself for several seconds before understanding that simplicity could look chosen instead of endured. That had unsettled her more than praise. Now standing in Lady Harbury's music room, with Lady Beatrice at her side, Cecily felt every glance note the improvement and search for the reason. The room was full of people who had heard something. Perhaps that she had discovered false entries in a charity ledger. Perhaps that the Duke of Loxley had placed a chair for her before half the county. Perhaps that Lady Maud had been seen leaving Lady Beatrice's house with her mouth too controlled and Florence too pale. Society loved truth only after it had been salted with scandal. At the pianoforte, a young lady adjusted her sheet music with trembling fingers. Near the mantel, Lady Maud stood in black watered silk, her lilac gloves folded over a fan that moved too slowly. Florence wore rose satin and pearls, bright enough to make every candle useful. She smiled at Cecily as if nothing had changed, and everything had been forgiven without Cecily's permission. You are to remain near me, Lady Beatrice murmured. If anyone purrs, assume claws. Cecily looked across the room, where Mrs. Alderley was speaking with Lady Harbury. I thought a musicale would be safer than a committee. Music allows more people to pretend they are not listening. A footman passed with lemonade. Cecily took none. The fan in her reticule seemed heavier than usual, though the strip of silk had been secured at Lady Beatrice's house. Since the initials had appeared, she had felt as if her mother's memory had become a door half open behind her. She wanted Mr. Pemberdane's answer. She did not want to spend the evening wondering whether laughter from the sofa concerned a missed note or her name. Mrs. Alderley approached with her cane, her eyes sharp beneath silver brows. Miss Vane, a word. Cecily curtsied. Ma'am, do not stand alone tonight. Lady Beatrice's expression hardened. What have you heard, Mrs.? Alderley glanced toward a group of younger women near the screen. Paper travels faster than truth when folded small. Cecily's stomach tightened. Paper? Copies of something. I saw one passed behind Lady Harbury's palms, which is not where innocence usually sits. Before Cecily could answer, a light laugh rose near the harp. Florence stood there with two young ladies and a folded half-sheet between gloved fingers. She did not look at Cecily, which was how Cecily knew she was meant to. One of the ladies read, covered her mouth, and looked swiftly across the room. The look struck Cecily full in the face before it skittered away. Lady Beatrice took one step, but Cecily touched her arm. Please, let me see it before we answer what it says. Good, Mrs. Alderley said softly. Better to know the snake's pattern before one steps. Cecily crossed the room. Conversation dipped but did not stop. Florence turned with perfect surprise. Cecily, how grave you look. Has the music offended you? No, the paper. The two ladies beside Florence looked trapped by their own curiosity. Florence's smile thinned. What paper? Cecily held out her hand. The one being passed with my name on it. A faint flush touched Florence's cheeks. You have become very bold since yesterday. No. Merely harder to discuss from a distance. One of the ladies gave a nervous little laugh, and then stopped when no one joined her. Florence glanced toward Lady Maud. Lady Maud watched, motionless. That was permission and warning together. Florence unfolded the paper slowly and placed it in Cecily's hand. It's only a silly thing someone copied. You mustn't take everything as injury. The sheet had been written in an altered hand, close enough to suggest quotation and vague enough to deny authorship. Cecily read it once. Then again, because the first reading made her breath too shallow to trust. Miss Vane is said to have arrived at Loxley House when Lady Beatrice was absent, having made herself look faint enough to secure his Grace's notice. A charity errand may become courtship if a poor relation understands timing. Pity opens doors pride cannot. She did not move. She did not crumple the paper. That would have pleased them. The cruelty was not only in the accusation. It was in the way it took true things and bent them until they accused her of designing her own humiliation. She had arrived when Lady Beatrice was absent. She had been faint with travel and fear. The Duke had noticed. A chair had been brought. All of it had happened. The lie was the shape, forced around it. Florence watched her too closely. Well, Cecily lifted her eyes. You have always been quick to find grief entertaining. Florence's face hardened. If you are determined to misunderstand sympathy, no one can help you. This is not sympathy. Lady Maud came toward them then, graceful and sorrowful, the room opening for her, because rank still remembered old habits. Cecily, my dear, lower your voice. Cecily had not raised it. That was the first trick. I am speaking plainly. You are distressed. That was the second. No, everyone can see it. That was the third. Turn a woman's composure into fragility, and any answer sounds like proof. Lady Maud reached as if to take the paper. Cecily kept it. A whisper passed behind her. Lady Harbury approached, anxious and useless. Perhaps we should have the first song. Lady Beatrice's cane touched the floor once. Perhaps we should have the truth. Lady Maud sighed with exquisite pain. I fear the truth is that Cecily has been flattered beyond her station by attentions meant only as charity. His Grace is known to be generous where family misfortune is concerned. His Grace is not here, Florence said, sweetly enough to wound, which is fortunate. This would distress him terribly. The door opened before the sentence finished. The room changed more quickly than manners could conceal. Adrian Vale entered in evening dress, dark, spare, and colder than the silver branches of candles above him. Lady Harbury looked as though Providence had arrived without giving notice. Adrian bowed to the room, then saw Cecily holding the paper. He did not cross to her at once. His gaze took in Florence's colour, Lady Maud's composed sorrow, Lady Beatrice's fury, Mrs. Alderley's tightened mouth, and the little half-circle of women trying to become furniture. Miss Vane, he said. Cecily held out the paper. He took it with a slight bow, read it, and the quiet around him sharpened until even the harp strings seemed afraid to settle. A clumsy production, he said. Florence inhaled. Lady Maud lifted her chin. Your Grace, I regret that you should be troubled by a young woman's confusion. I am troubled by cowardice. Confusion is innocent, more often than cowardice is. He looked toward Lady Harbury. Was this distributed in your room? Lady Harbury flushed. I cannot say, Your Grace. That is not an answer. It is shelter. Cecily saw Lady Maud's expression cool. She also saw something else. Adrian's anger, righteous and controlled, was moving faster than the wound itself. He turned back to Cecily. This must end. The words were meant to protect. They struck badly. Yes, she said carefully, it must. Then allow me to make your position clear before this room. You are under my aunt's protection, and I intend to call upon you formally. No one will mistake my interest for charity again. The room drew a breath. Florence went white. Lady Maud's eyes flashed before she lowered them. Lady Beatrice closed hers, as if she had just watched a clever man step into a pit clearly marked with flowers. Cecily heard the offer, understood the protection, and felt the old walls rising in a new shape. If she accepted in that instant, Everyone would say scandal had forced his hand. If she refused, they would say she had hoped for more and failed. Adrian was offering a shield so large it would hide her completely. "Because you wish to?" Cecily asked. "Or because they have forced your hand?" The question stripped the room of breath. Adrian's silence lasted only a second. It was a gentleman's second, disciplined and nearly invisible. Cecily saw it anyway. In that second, he measured reputation, safety, gossip, consequence, and the damage done to her name. He did not first answer as a man. He answered as a duke who knew how to repair public harm. "Cecily," he said. The first time her name had left him without miss before it, it should have warmed her. Instead, it hurt. "Your Grace," she replied. The title placed distance back where his voice had crossed it. His face changed. He understood too late. Lady Maud's eyes brightened with the smallest victory. "I cannot be rescued into another story I did not choose," Cecily said. Her voice did not carry loudly, but the room heard because every soul in it wanted the sentence for a different reason. "The paper is false. The insult is real. But I will not make a decision about my future because cruelty has gathered witnesses." Florence whispered. "How noble!" Mrs. Alderley turned on her. "Be quiet, child." Cecily gave the paper back to Adrian, not because it was his, but because she had finished allowing it to define the room. Then she curtsied to Lady Harbury. "I have taken enough of your evening." Lady Beatrice came to her side at once. "So have I." They left together. No one stopped them. The first song began behind them too late, a trembling voice rising over a room that had already forgotten how to listen. In the carriage, Lady Beatrice sat opposite Cecily and said nothing for almost a mile. That silence was a gift. Cecily looked out at London's lamps passing one by one and pressed her hands together until the tremor in them quieted. She had not wanted to wound Adrian. That knowledge sat beside anger, like an unwelcome guest. He had tried to help. But Hadleigh had taught her the danger of people who meant well while arranging her life for comfort, convenience, or appearance. Good intentions could still become a locked room if no one asked whether she wished to enter. Back in Lady Harbury's music room, Adrian stood with the folded paper in his hand and watched the door through which Cecily had gone. For the first time in many years, the Duke of Loxley felt the full uselessness of power applied one moment too soon. He had intended to protect her from being misread. Instead, he had nearly written the next sentence of her life, without waiting for her voice. Lady Maud moved toward him, with sorrow arranged beautifully on her face. "Your Grace, I am sure Cecily will regret embarrassing you when she recovers herself." Adrian looked at her then, and the coldness in his eyes made her stop. "No," he said. "I believe I am the one who must recover myself." He turned away before she could answer, carrying the false paper like evidence and rebuke together. The room resumed its music. Florence sat rigid beside her mother, wounded by the sight of a duke not withdrawing interest, but deepening shame in himself because he had failed Cecily. That was worse than admiration. Admiration could be stolen. Conscience could not. By dawn, Lady Maud's version of the music-hale had travelled farther than Cecily's carriage. It moved through London in folded notes, whispered calls, and sympathetic phrases that made cruelty sound like concern. Cecily did not hear it at first. She saw only the road from Lady Beatrice's townhouse to Harrowmere Hall, grey beneath a low sky, hedges blurred by passing rain, and the Duke's outriders keeping a careful distance from the carriage. Lady Beatrice sat opposite her, wrapped in dark wool and disapproval, while Martha rode in the second carriage with Cecily's small trunk, and the rescued fan packed close as if it were silver. Adrian had arranged everything before breakfast: proper chaperone, proper escort, proper destination, a country house removed from London's hungry rooms. It had been done with precision, speed, and a kind of protective intelligence that would have comforted another woman. Cecily was grateful. That made the ache worse. Gratitude had so often been demanded from her for things that narrowed her life that she no longer trusted the feeling when it arrived, dressed as safety. Lady Beatrice watched her for several miles before speaking. "You are thinking too loudly," Cecily looked up. I beg your pardon. An unbecoming habit in my family, though Adrian has made a profession of it. His Grace has been very kind. That sentence usually precedes a complaint from women too well bred to complain. Cecily turned her gaze to the wet glass. Kindness can still move a person without asking whether she wished to be moved. Lady Beatrice's expression sobered. Yes, it can. They reached Harrowmere Hall in the late afternoon after nearly 50 miles of road, damp fields, and silence, broken only by wheels and harness. The house rose from Hampshire's green like something built to endure disappointment without showing it. Pale stone stretched behind lawns rolling toward a lake darkened by rain. No London glitter softened it. Harrowmere did not try to charm. It stood. Servants came forward in quiet order. Brackett had clearly sent instructions ahead, because no one stared, no one whispered, and no one treated Cecily as a scandal delivered in wet gloves. Adrian dismounted before the carriage door and offered his hand to Lady Beatrice first, then stepped back as Cecily descended. He did not touch her without invitation. The restraint hurt too, because he had learned the lesson she had meant to teach, and yet the damage that required it remained between them. Miss Vane, he said, you are safe here. The words were meant as shelter. Cecily looked at the open doors, the polished threshold, the servants waiting to receive her with the courtesy Lady Maud had always made feel expensive. Am I? Adrian stilled. Lady Beatrice glanced between them and said nothing. No one will insult you under this roof, he said. No one did at first under Lady Beatrice's, Cecily replied. Yet the room beyond it found a way. His jaw tightened. London had become unsafe. London was hearing only one story. He accepted the correction, but not easily. I thought distance would give you peace. Perhaps it will. She looked toward the lake, where rain trembled on the surface. Or perhaps quiet is only useful to the person who speaks while I am absent. Adrian's face changed, not with offense, but with the recognition of a wound he had not meant to touch. Come inside, Lady Beatrice said briskly. Philosophy is improved by dry stockings. Harrowmere gave Cecily a room in the east wing, all clean linen, pale blue hangings, and windows looking toward the lake. Martha arrived shortly after, damp, indignant, and determined to distrust any house large enough to misplace a maid. She unpacked with unnecessary force. They've put me 2 doors away, she said, as if I were a visiting relation with fewer opinions. You have many opinions, and good ones. Cecily sat on the edge of the bed and removed her gloves. The reticule lay beside her. Inside it, the cracked fan rested quiet, but the hidden silk had already made quiet impossible. E.V. March 3, 1824. Pember Dane. Her mother's initials had followed her here, into a duke's house, across every mile Lady Maud could not command. Martha, Cecily said, did my mother ever speak of money? Martha's hand slowed on a folded shawl. Gentlewomen speak of money less than they bleed from it. That is not an answer, no. Martha looked toward the door, then back. She said once that you must have something of your own. I thought she meant trinkets, a little box. The fan, maybe. Your father was alive then, and I was younger and more foolish. I thought gentlemen did what papers told them to do. Cecily absorbed the confession without anger. There would be time for anger when truth had edges. If Mr. Dane answers, I will read everything. Good. Martha's voice roughened. Your mother would want that. The first cards arrived before breakfast the next morning. Then more came after the post. Lady Beatrice had them brought to the morning room in a silver tray, and her expression became harder with each seal. Adrian entered just as she slit open the 4th note. Cecily sat near the window with untouched tea cooling beside her. She knew before anyone read aloud that absence had already been turned against her. Lady Beatrice unfolded a card from Mrs. Felton. Lady Maud has been calling. Adrian's face went still. Naturally, she expresses herself with maternal sorrow and strategic economy. Cecily held out her hand. May I read it? Lady Beatrice gave it to her. The note was short, affectionate in the way a gloved hand could press upon a bruise. Lady Maud wished all friends to understand that Cecily had been taken to Harrowmere for quiet after a distressing display of nervous confusion. His Grace's family had acted with generosity, but Lady Maud feared the poor girl's judgment remained unsettled. It was hoped no one would repeat unkind rumours while Cecily recovered under gentle supervision. Cecily read the phrase twice, under gentle supervision. The words were softer than confinement and more dangerous because of it. She passed the note to Adrian. He read it once. The room lost warmth. "This is a lie." "It is worse," Cecily said. "It is almost believable." Lady Beatrice opened another. "Lady Harbury writes that Florence wept after we left and said Cecily mistook compassion for attachment. Very touching." "I hope the girl sprained her conscience." Adrian looked toward Cecily. "I will answer at once. As Duke of Loxley, as the man whose house is being used to support a falsehood. And if you answer for me again?" The question stopped him. Rain slid down the window behind her in thin lines. Cecily had never felt less dramatic in her life. She felt clear, tired, frightened, but clear. "At Lady Harbury's, you tried to place my future beyond gossip by announcing your intention before asking what it meant to me. Here you brought me somewhere safe, and Lady Maud has called it proof that I am too unstable to be seen. I am in your country house while another woman explains me to the world." Adrian did not defend himself. That made the conversation more painful. "I was wrong," he said, "not to wish you safe. To think safety could be separated from your voice." Cecily's throat tightened. She reached for the writing paper on the small table. Her hand was steady. "Then I must answer." Lady Beatrice watched without interrupting. Adrian came no closer. Cecily wrote slowly, because every word had to belong to her. "Your Grace, I am grateful for safety, but I cannot be protected into silence." She paused, crossed out "cannot," and rewrote the sentence as she would say it if breath were allowed to tremble. Then she began again on a fresh page, because this was not a letter to be hidden behind stiffness. "Your Grace, I'm grateful for safety, but I can't be protected into silence." She looked up. "That is what I would say aloud." Adrian's eyes held hers. "Then say it." She set down the pen. "I'm grateful for safety, but I can't be protected into silence. If I must face Lady Maud's lies, let me face them as myself, not as a scandal hidden until convenient. I don't ask you to stand before me. Stand where I can see you, and let me speak." The words changed him more visibly than praise or accusation had done. Something in his posture loosened, not into softness but into humility. "I thought I was giving you peace. You gave me quiet. There is a difference." "Yes." Lady Beatrice folded Mrs. Felton's note with unnecessary precision. "Now that we have established my nephew is capable of learning, what shall we do about Lady Maud?" Cecily turned to the reticule beside her chair. "The proof is not here." Adrian followed her glance. "Hadleigh, my mother's room, the old dressing room, there may be papers. Lady Maud feared Mr. Dane before she knew about the silk. That means she knew where to fear from. You will not go alone. No, you will not go without a plan. No, and you will not be silenced by mine." Cecily looked at him then, and the room seemed to hold its breath around the correction he had made. Himself speak. "No," she said, "I will not." Lady Beatrice rose, her cane in hand. "Excellent, a raid conducted with propriety. I have lived long enough to see civilization improve." Adrian almost smiled, but his gaze remained on Cecily. "Tell me what you need." That question, more than the chair, more than the escort, more than the anger on her behalf, reached the place Hadleigh had trained to expect command. Cecily opened the reticule and touched the broken fan. Her mother had hidden one truth in it. Perhaps Hadleigh still held the rest. "A carriage that does not stop at the front door," she said. "Martha with me, a footman who can wait out of sight, and you close enough to come if called, but not so close that Lady Maud can say I was led." Adrian bowed his head once. "Then that is what you shall have." Outside, rain continued over Harrowmere's lake. Inside, the quiet changed. It no longer felt like concealment. It felt like preparation. Cecily looked at the calling cards spread across the table, each one a small proof that Lady Maud would bury her under pity if given another day. By tomorrow, she would return to Hadleigh Close. not as the girl sent away with a violet-sealed insult, not as a guest hidden in a duke's house. She would enter the old rooms with her mother's fan in her hand, and the first true choice of her life before her. Cecily returned to Hadleigh Close through the side lane because she had spent too many years entering her own life by permission. The Duke's carriage stopped beyond the kitchen garden, screened by wet hawthorn and a low stone wall mottled with moss. The morning was pale and unsettled, with clouds moving low over Hampshire and the smell of rain still clinging to the hedges. Martha sat beside Cecily, her gloved hands folded so tightly that the seams strained. On the box, one of Adrian's footmen faced forward with the careful blankness of a man instructed to hear only what might save a lady from danger. Adrian himself remained farther down the lane on horseback, hidden beyond the bend with another servant. Close enough to come, far enough not to lead. Cecily had asked for that distance. Watching him grant, it had been harder than watching him refuse might have been. Power was simple when it opposed her. It became complicated when it learned restraint for her sake. My lady said she would be at Mrs. Felton's until 4, Martha whispered, though the house stood still as a closed hand before them. She said it twice yesterday in front of Mrs. Finch's cousin. I don't trust it, but I heard it. Then we used the time she gave us. She didn't give us anything. We are taking it. Cecily looked at the small, fierce woman who had known her mother's voice and her own childhood fears. Yes, she said. We are. The side door opened to Martha's old key after one stubborn turn. Hadleigh smelled as it always had, lavender laid over damp, beeswax over old wood, economy over decay. Cecily stepped into the back passage and felt the house recognize her with no welcome at all. The flagstones were familiar beneath her shoes. The still-room door stood ajar. Somewhere above, a floorboard settled with the faint sigh of a place accustomed to listening. Once, that sound would have made her pause and consider whether she had done something wrong by existing in the wrong corridor. Now she held her reticule close and walked on. They took the back stairs. Martha went first, moving with the certainty of service, avoiding the third step that creaked and the loose strip of carpet near the landing. Cecily followed, each turn of the stair-opening rooms she knew too well. Florence's chamber door was shut. Lady Maud's sitting room was quiet. At the end of the narrow passage, half hidden behind a linen press, stood the door to the old dressing room that had once belonged to Eleanor Vane. After Eleanor's death, the room had been stripped of beauty by degrees. First the mirror, then the perfume bottles, then the chair by the window. Lady Maud had called it practical. Grief at Hadleigh had been permitted only if it made storage easier. Martha opened the door. Dust and the stale scent of folded cloth met them. Trunks lined one wall. A cracked washstand stood beneath the window, its marble top stained by years of neglect. A screen with faded embroidery leaned in the corner. Cecily stepped inside and closed the door without latching it. Her heart beat steadily. That surprised her. Fear was there, but it had become useful, like a candle held low in a dark passage. Where would she have hidden papers? Martha asked. If Lady Maud knew, they would be gone. Cecily crossed to the washstand. So somewhere my mother knew, and Lady Maud did not value. She set her reticule on the marble and took out the cracked pearl-handled fan. In daylight, the split in the guard looked darker than it had at Lady Beatrice's table. The strip of silk had already been removed and secured, but the repair beneath it felt uneven under her thumb. She remembered, suddenly and with such force that the dusty room brightened around the edges. Her mother sitting by a summer window, laughing softly, as little Cecily tried to open the fan too quickly. Not like a sword, my darling. A fan wins by patience, and sometimes it hides more than a lady's blush. The memory had always seemed no more than tenderness. Now it sounded like instruction. Cecily bent close. The cracked guard had a narrow hollow beneath the pearl, disguised by old glue and a sliver of silk. She pressed gently. Nothing moved. Martha leaned near. Miss Cecily? A pin. Martha searched her cuff and produced one. Cecily slid the pin beneath the loosened pearl. The old repair lifted by a hair's breadth. Something dark glinted inside, small as a broken thorn. She eased it free with the pin's point and caught it in her palm. A tiny key lay there, blackened with age, its bow no larger than a fingernail. Martha made the sign of the cross before she could stop herself. God keep her. Your mother hid that. Cecily closed her fingers around the key. Her throat ached, but she did not let the ache become tears. She expected me to remember. You were a child. She trusted the woman I would become. The words changed the room. Cecily turned to the washstand. Its visible drawer held only yellowed sachets, a cracked comb, and a bundle of old ribbon. Nothing of value. Then she knelt and ran her hand beneath the lower shelf. Dust coated her glove. Her fingers found a seam too straight to be accidental. A narrow, concealed drawer had been fitted beneath the washstand, almost flush with the wood. The tiny key entered with difficulty. For one breath, Cecily feared time had swollen the lock beyond use. Then it turned. The drawer released with a dry whisper. Inside lay a packet wrapped in faded blue ribbon. On the top, in a hand Cecily knew from 3 surviving birthday notes, and the label inside an old prayer book, was written, "For Cecily, when she must ask for herself." Martha began to cry silently. Cecily did not. She lifted the packet and sat back on her heels, because her legs had forgotten how to rise. The blue ribbon came undone with one pull. The first letter was brittle at the fold. My dearest child, if this reaches you, then I have failed to say aloud what should have been protected in law. Mr. Pember Dane holds copies of my settlement. Your father agreed that a portion of my income should be kept for your maintenance and independence. If I am gone before you are of age, ask for the March papers. Trust no summary given without his seal. Cecily read the lines once, then again, and each reading rearranged another year of her life. Maintenance and independence, not generosity. Not a tolerated bed, not gowns turned twice, and gratitude measured by hunger avoided. Her mother had written the word independence, as if it could belong to a daughter. There is more, Martha said, wiping her cheeks with the back of her hand. Beneath the letter were copies of accounts, annual notices, receipts marked by Sir Edmund's hand after Eleanor's death, and later papers with Lady Maud's smaller, sharper writing in the margins. Season expenses, dressmaker, music instruction, household appearance. Florence's name did not appear often, but her life stood between the entries like a silk gown hung over stolen bread. Cecily turned one page and saw Mr. Ellery's unpaid wages listed against a household reduction. Dated the same month, a London modiste had been paid from a fund marked EV balance. She did not steal jewels, Cecily said. She stole room. Martha knelt beside her. Miss Cecily. Enough for a proper companion, enough to pay servants. Enough to refuse a grey gown chosen as an insult. Her voice remained calm, because the truth had gone deeper than anger could reach at once. Enough to choose. Martha's face crumpled. Your mother once said, "My girl must have something of her own, I should have told you." I was afraid. Sir Edmund was master, and after him my lady held every key. Cecily touched the old letter with one fingertip. You kept me warm. That was a kind of truth too. Footsteps sounded below. Not servants moving in ordinary rhythm. Carriage wheels had struck gravel. A door opened with force. Martha stiffened. She is early. Cecily gathered the papers, but she did not hide them. The instinct to conceal belonged to Hadleigh's old rule. She had come to break it. Lady Maud's voice rose from the hall, smooth at first, then sharpened by some servant's nervous answer. Florence's lighter step followed on the stairs. The dressing-room door opened before Martha could reach it. Lady Maud stood there in a travelling cloak, her face pale beneath the brim of her bonnet. Florence appeared behind her, pretty mouth parted, eyes moving at once to the packet in Cecily's hands. How unfortunate, Lady Maud said. I had hoped even you would not stoop to theft. Cecily rose slowly, her knees held. These belong to my mother. Your mother's private effects belong to the family. You have no right to rummage through rooms like a dismissed maid. Martha stepped forward. Miss Cecily has every right to her mother's letter. Be silent, Martha, or you will discover how little sentiment protects old servants. Cecily moved one step between them. Do not threaten her. Lady Maud's eyes narrowed. You have grown fond of speeches since strangers began applauding you. Florence looked at the papers. Mama, what are they? Old nonsense. They mention my music master, Cecily said. Florence's gaze snapped to her. What? Lady Maud extended her hand. Give them to me. No. The word was small, complete, and different from the refusal at Lady Beatrice's house. That one had been a door held shut. This one was a key turned. Lady Maud's composure thinned. You cannot possibly understand settlements, accounts, or family obligations. I understand entries. I understand dates. I understand your notes in the margins, you understand nothing of what it costs to maintain standing. If my mother's settlement paid Florence's gowns, then I understand enough. Florence recoiled as if the accounts had accused her aloud. Mama, do not listen. Lady Maud's voice cut harder now. No one will believe a desperate girl over a widow of good standing. Cecily held up the top letter. The old paper trembled only slightly. Perhaps not. But they may believe my mother's hand, Mr. Dane's seal, and your own notes in the margins. For the first time, Lady Maud had no immediate answer. Downstairs, the front door opened. A footman's voice sounded in the hall, firm, unfamiliar to Hadleigh, and trained by a better house. A message from His Grace the Duke of Loxley. Lady Maud turned her head. Florence went utterly still. Cecily kept the packet against her heart, not as a shield, but as proof. The house that had swallowed every truth for years had begun to echo. The footman's voice carried up the stairwell with the clear, trained steadiness of Loxley House, and for one breath, no one in the old dressing-room moved. Lady Maud stood by the door with her hand, still half extended for the packet she had failed to command. Florence stared at the papers in Cecily's arms, as if ink could rise and name her. Martha held herself behind Cecily, rigid with the terror of a servant who had spoken too much, and the relief of one who could not unsay it. Then a second set of footsteps sounded below, slower than the footman's, familiar now in their restraint. They crossed the hall of Hadleigh Close, as though the house had no authority over them at all. Lady Maud recovered first. This is intolerable, she said, turning toward the passage. His Grace has no right to force entry into a private family matter. Cecily did not answer. She heard the footsteps begin up the stairs, not rushed, not theatrical. Each one gave her time to decide whether she wanted rescue or witness, and by the time Adrian Vale appeared at the threshold, rain-darkened coat still on his shoulders and hat in one hand, she knew which would cost her more and which would make her free. He looked first at Lady Maud, then at Florence, then at Martha, and lastly at Cecily. His gaze did not fall to the papers until he had searched her face. That mattered. He had come for her state before her evidence. Miss Vane, he said. Lady Maud swept into a curtsy so precise it nearly cut the room. Your Grace, I must protest this intrusion. Cecily has allowed excitement and misplaced encouragement to drive her into ransacking private rooms. I am sure you will not wish your name used to dignify theft. Adrian did not take the bait. He looked only at Cecily. Do you wish me to speak or stand witness? The question made Lady Maud's face change. Florence's mouth parted. Martha let out a breath that sounded almost like a sob. Cecily felt the packet against her bodice, the brittle paper inside it, the letter addressed to the woman her mother had believed she would become. All her life, rooms had decided for her before she entered them. This room had stored her mother's voice under dust. She would not surrender it now, not even to the man who had first shown her kindness. Stand witness, she said. Adrian bowed his head once. Then I shall. Lady Maud's laugh was low and incredulous. How very grand. A girl with no legal knowledge, no income she can prove, and no understanding of family management, appoints a duke as spectator. Cecily untied the faded blue ribbon. Her fingers shook once, then steadied. My mother wrote this. Your mother was dying. Yes. Still clearer than you hoped. Florence looked from Cecily to Lady Maud. Mama, what does it say? Nothing that concerns you. It concerns her if my mother's settlement paid for her gowns, Cecily said. Florence's face flushed scarlet. Lady Maud moved sharply. Adrian remained still, but the footman at the stairhead straightened by a fraction. That was enough. Lady Maud stopped. Cecily opened the first letter. "My dearest child," she read, and her voice nearly failed on the first 3 words. She drew one breath and continued. "If this reaches you, then I have failed to say aloud what should have been protected in law. Mr. Pember Dane holds copies of my settlement. Your father agreed that a portion of my income should be kept for your maintenance and independence. If I am gone before you are of age, ask for the March papers. Trust no summary given without his seal." She lowered the letter. The house seemed to listen. "There are receipts beneath it. There are annual notices. There are later notes in your hand, Lady Maud. Season expenses, dressmaker, music instruction, household appearance." Lady Maud's face hardened into something older than anger. A household does not maintain itself on sentiment. Sir Edmund left confusion. "I preserved the family's standing. With my mother's money, with family money, marked for my maintenance and independence. You had maintenance. You had a roof over your head, food at the table, and a place in a respectable home." Cecily looked around the stripped dressing room, at the trunks, the neglected washstand, the dust on her mother's last hidden drawer. A place is not the same as a life. Florence made a small, wounded sound. "I didn't know." Cecily looked at her. "No, you did not ask." The words were not loud. They struck hard because they were clean. Florence turned away, but not before Cecily saw resentment fighting shame. Lady Maud's voice dropped. "Be careful, Cecily. There are many ways for society to understand an ungrateful girl. His Grace cannot stand in every room you enter." "No," Cecily said, "but my mother's hand can. Mr. Dane's seal can. Your notes can." She folded the letter and placed it back with the papers. "I am leaving with these. You will leave this house with nothing that belongs to it. Then it is fortunate these belonged to my mother." Lady Maud looked at Adrian at last, abandoning the false softness entirely. "And you will permit this?" "Miss Vane asked me to stand witness," he said. "I am doing so. She will ruin herself. Then the choice will be hers, not yours." The old sentence from Loxley House returned to Cecily in a new shape. Choose. It no longer felt fragile. It felt heavy, like a key. Martha stepped forward and picked up the cracked fan from the washstand, wrapping it carefully in the corner of her apron before giving it to Cecily. "You forgot this, Miss Cecily." "No," Cecily said softly. "I think it remembered me." She placed the fan in her reticule, held the packet openly, and walked toward the door. Lady Maud did not step aside at once. For years, Cecily would have lowered her eyes and waited for permission to pass. Now she met the older woman's gaze. "Move, Lady Maud." It was not shouted. It did not need to be. Lady Maud moved. Downstairs, the hall smelled of lavender and wet wool. The Loxley footman opened the front door, and damp air rushed in. Cecily paused on the threshold, looking back once at the staircase, the polished banister, the doorways that had measured her movements since childhood. No tenderness rose for the house. Only recognition. A place could hold pain without deserving devotion. Outside, the carriage waited at the end of the drive. Adrian walked beside her, but did not offer his arm until they reached the uneven gravel. Then he stopped and held it slightly forward, leaving her the right to refuse. Cecily placed her gloved hand on his sleeve. The touch was correct, brief, and more intimate for all it did not claim. "You were brave," he said quietly. The praise hurt less than it once would have. "I was frightened. Those are often the same road viewed from opposite ends." She looked at him then. The rain had darkened his hair at the temples. His face held no triumph, no satisfaction in having bested Lady Maud, only concern and something like remorse. "Thank you for not speaking over me. I nearly did. I know, I wanted to. I know that too." He absorbed the truth without defense. "Then I am grateful you knew what you wanted, before I could mistake my anger for your need." Cecily entered the carriage with Martha, the packet held between them like a sleeping child. Adrian mounted his horse and rode behind them all the way to Harrowmere, near enough to be seen whenever Cecily looked through the rear glass, and never near enough to make her feel escorted as property. That balance, so carefully chosen, unsettled her more deeply than command would have. At Harrowmere Hall, Lady Beatrice received the papers in the library with spectacles, tea, and a fury so cold it bordered on elegance. The packet was placed on the central table, not locked away. Cecily insisted upon that. Lady Beatrice read the first page, then the next, her mouth tightening. Martha stood near the fire, hands clasped, refusing a chair until Lady Beatrice snapped. "Sit down, woman. Your loyalty is not improved by tired knees." Martha sat. Adrian remained by the window until Cecily looked at him and realized he was waiting to be invited nearer. "You may read them," she said. "Only if you wish it. I do. I need another mind on the dates." He came to the table and stood across from her, not beside her. As if the documents formed ground, neither of them should invade carelessly. Together with Lady Beatrice, they sorted the accounts into piles. Eleanor's letter, settlement references, Sir Edmund's receipts, Lady Maud's margin notes, household debts, expenses that had served Florence's appearance, rather than Cecily's maintenance. The truth became worse as it became orderly. Cecily had imagined theft as something dramatic. Instead, it had been annual, polite, written in ink, disguised beneath words like propriety and appearance. When Lady Beatrice took Martha away to find a stronger pot of tea and to send for a discreet clerk, Cecily and Adrian were left in the library, with the door open and a footman visible in the corridor. The propriety of it comforted her. The silence did not frighten her. Adrian touched none of the papers. "I owe you an apology," he said. Cecily looked up. "For Hadleigh? For Harrowmere? You brought me somewhere safe. I removed you from the room in which your name was being taken apart. I thought quiet would protect you. Lady Maud used that quiet to claim you were under supervision." He turned the word with distaste. "I helped make her lie plausible. The honesty was painful because it asked nothing in return." Cecily folded her hands over her mother's letter. At Hadleigh, being moved somewhere quiet meant someone else wished to be comfortable. "I know you did not mean that." Meaning well did not prevent the harm. She looked toward the rain-blurred window. "No." He accepted that too. "Do not let me do it again." Cecily's gaze returned to him. "That is not a promise you can make alone. Then tell me how to help keep it." A duke asking how, not what to command, should have felt impossible. Instead, it felt like the first honest foundation between them. "Do not love justice more than you listen to the injured." The words left her before she could polish them. Adrian's eyes changed. "I did, at the musicale, yes, and yesterday perhaps when I arranged safety before asking what story safety would tell. Yes." He drew a slow breath. "Then I will learn." She searched his face. "Not try. Try is too easy a word for a man accustomed to being forgiven for effort." The faint ache in her chest warmed despite herself. "Lady Beatrice has been speaking to you. Relentlessly." A small smile came and vanished between them. Then his expression sobered. "Cecily, I began to need your good opinion before I had earned the right to ask for it." Her heart moved sharply. The open door, the footman in the corridor, the papers on the table, all kept the moment within propriety. Nothing improper had been said, yet everything had shifted. "Do not ask yet," she said. "Not. While my mother's truth is still treated as a family embarrassment, I will not. When Mr. Dane confirms this, I will face Lady Maud publicly, where she cannot call it nerves, where she cannot call it household misunderstanding." Adrian nodded. "A county room, then. Witnesses enough to make denial expensive, and I will speak." "Yes," he said. "You will." Cecily looked down at her mother's letter, then at the man who had learned to stand across from her instead of in front of her. The road ahead frightened her. Lady Maud had not finished. Society had not finished. But for the first time, Cecily did not imagine herself entering the next room alone or hidden. "Stand where I can see you," she said. Adrian bowed his head. "Always, Mrs." Felton's invitation arrived at Harrowmere on paper so thick and white that it seemed made for innocence, though the faint basket of lilies pressed at the top warned Cecily otherwise. She noticed it, because she had begun to notice everything paper wished people to overlook. The lilies were almost invisible, until the page tilted toward the window. Their stems crossed beneath a tiny Felton crest, delicate enough to be mistaken for decoration. Lady Beatrice watched Cecily turn the note once, then twice. "You see something?" "Only the paper," Cecily said. "Mrs. Felton uses a pressed crest. A woman who presses lilies into paper usually believes herself harmless." Lady Beatrice took the invitation and read it aloud in a voice dry enough to crack porcelain. "Dinner, a few intimate friends, a hope that recent discomforts may be eased by civil conversation. How tender. How ominous." Adrian stood near the library hearth, one hand resting on the mantel, his expression composed but not still. Since Hadleigh, he had been careful with stillness. He no longer wore silence like a wall. He offered it like space. "Lady Maud will be there," he said. "Of course she will," Lady Beatrice replied. "Mrs. Felton has not the imagination to arrange treachery without assistance." Cecily folded the invitation. "Then I should go." Adrian's gaze moved to her. "You owe no one a dinner." "No. But Lady Maud has chosen a room where sympathy can be made to look like judgment. If I am absent, she will rehearse my madness without interruption." Lady Beatrice gave a short nod. "A useful distinction. We shall attend." Adrian did not say he would prevent it. That restraint reached Cecily more deeply than protest would have done. "Mr. Dane?" she asked. "He is expected in London tomorrow morning," Adrian said. "My man found him through his old clerk. He is frail, but willing to come if needed. Then we may need him tonight." Adrian understood. "I will arrange it quietly." Cecily looked again at the lilies on the paper. "Quietly is not the same as secretly." "No," he said. "Not when you are told, Mrs. Felton's dining room that evening glittered with polished silver, soft lamps, and the brittle courage of a hostess who had invited scandal to dine and hoped it would use the proper fork. Cecily arrived with Lady Beatrice, Adrian following at the correct distance, neither escorting Cecily as a claim nor abandoning her to the room. Martha remained below stairs with the packet of copied documents secured in Lady Beatrice's locked travelling case. The original letter from Adrian Vale stayed at Harrowmere. Cecily had insisted. Lady Maud had stolen enough by proximity. Lady Maud stood near the fireplace in black silk, her widowhood arranged like moral authority. Florence stood beside her in pale rose, too bright for unease, her pearls gleaming at her throat. Mrs. Felton greeted Cecily with anxious warmth. "Miss Vane, I am so pleased you've come. Thank you for receiving me. We all hope for a calmer understanding tonight." "Understanding is rarely calm at first," Lady Beatrice said. "It becomes so after people stop lying." Mrs. Felton looked as if she had swallowed a pin. Dinner passed with the awful politeness of people waiting for a vase to fall. Lady Maud spoke of parish duties, Florence of music, Lady Harbury of spring roads, and Mrs. Felton of soup with a desperation that made the soup seem accused. Cecily answered only when addressed. She had learned that silence could either erase a woman or sharpen her. Tonight, she chose the latter. After dinner, when the ladies withdrew, and the gentlemen followed unusually, soon the drawing-room became the true stage. Lady Maud waited until coffee had been served. Then she rose, one folded paper in her hand. Cecily noticed its whiteness before she heard the first word. "My friends," Lady Maud began, sorrow braided through every syllable. "I had hoped private distress would remain private. Yet affection must sometimes speak when a young person is being led into harm." Florence lowered her lashes. Mrs. Felton pressed a handkerchief to her lips. Adrian stood near the far wall, close enough for Cecily to see him, and far enough that no one could claim his voice before hers. Lady Maud unfolded the paper. "A letter came into my possession today. I wish, for Cecily's sake, that I could doubt the hand. I cannot." Cecily did not move. Lady Maud read. "Dear Florence, you may think me foolish, but His Grace has shown me kindness, and kindness from a duke may be turned to advantage if one is careful. Lady Maud never understood what I am owed. If the county believes me wronged, so much the better. Pity opens doors pride cannot. A charity errand may yet become a station if I hold my nerve." A gasp moved through the room, soft as silk tearing. Florence lifted her handkerchief higher, though her eyes remained dry. Lady Maud folded the page halfway. I shall not distress Miss Vane by reading more. Cecily rose. Then you will not object if I read the rest. Lady Maud's face cooled. My dear, I don't think exposing yourself further will help. If the letter is mine, it cannot expose me to myself. Mrs. Alderley, seated near the window, leaned forward. Let her see it. The room shifted. Lady Maud had to cross the space and place the letter in Cecily's hand. The paper felt expensive, faintly ridged beneath her glove. Cecily held it near the lamp. There it was, above the words meant to destroy her. The basket of lilies, pressed so lightly that arrogance had trusted no one would look. This is Mrs. Felton's paper, Cecily said. Mrs. Felton went pale. Mine? The lilies at the top. The same crest appeared on your invitation this morning. Mrs. Felton rose halfway. That paper is kept in my morning room. Florence's breath caught. Cecily heard it. Lady Maud smiled with pity. Cecily has visited many rooms in many houses lately. Perhaps she took a sheet. I have never entered Mrs. Felton's morning room. Florence spoke too quickly. You wouldn't need to. Mamma said the room was empty before dinner, and the writing desk was right there. Silence struck so hard that even Florence seemed to hear what she had done. Lady Maud turned her head slowly. Florence. The single word contained warning too late to be useful. Mrs. Alderley tapped her cane once. That is a curious detail for an innocent daughter. Florence flushed. I only meant if someone had taken paper it would have been easy. Easy for whom? Cecily asked. Florence looked away. Lady Maud stepped forward. This is grotesque. A nervous girl twists a careless remark into accusation because she cannot answer the letter. I can answer it. Cecily turned the page toward the lamp. My mother's name is written here as Eleanor. With an A, I write Eleanor with an I as she did. I have written it that way in every Hadleigh account since I was old enough to correct one. Lady Beatrice's eyes sharpened with pride. Cecily continued. The date is written in the form Lady Maud uses. Day, month, year with a curl beneath the final figure. I use no curl. Lady Maud gave a short laugh. Now handwriting is a confession? No. Repetition is. Cecily held up the page. The phrase dangerous misunderstandings appears here. You used it yesterday in your note to Mrs. Felton and this afternoon in front of Lady Harbury's maid. You used it because you hoped everyone else would repeat it. Mrs. Felton sat heavily. Lady Maud, is this true? Certainly not. You all see what is happening. Cecily has grown skilled at performing injury. Adrian's hand tightened on the back of a chair, but he did not speak. Cecily saw the restraint and gathered strength from it. Lady Maud reached for the paper. Give that back. No. Florence moved first, whether to help her mother or save herself. Cecily never knew. Her hand caught Cecily's reticule instead of the letter. The cord pulled loose. The cracked pearl-handled fan fell to the carpet and opened halfway with a soft, broken whisper. A small strip of pearl loosened from the old repair. From beneath it, a second fold of silk slid into view, narrower than the first and darker with age. The room leaned toward it. Adrian stepped forward, then stopped before touching it. His gaze went to Cecily. Permission she bent, picked up the fan, and freed the silk with careful fingers. The ink was faded but legible. E.V. March 3rd. Trust copy. P.D. Lady Beatrice exhaled. Trust copy. Cecily's throat tightened. Her mother had hidden not one clue but two, as if she knew a single whisper might not survive Lady Maud's house. Pemberdayne, Mrs. Alderley said. Lady Maud's composure cracked at the name. Enough. The door opened. Mrs. Felton's butler stood there with the expression of a man who would rather interrupt a bishop than the present company. Behind him waited a small, elderly gentleman in a dark coat, his white hair brushed neatly back, a leather portfolio held against his chest. Adrian turned. Mr. Dane, the old solicitor, bowed with care. Your Grace, Lady Beatrice. His eyes found Cecily, and his face changed with a grief too old to perform. Miss Vane, Lady Maud gripped the back of a chair. Florence sat down as if her knees had forgotten society. Cecily held the forged letter in one hand and her mother's hidden silk in the other. For years, Lady Maud had controlled rooms by deciding what they were allowed to hear. Now the room had paper, witnesses, a careless daughter's slip, and a man from the past carrying seals no performance could soften. Mr. Pemberdane stepped inside. "I believe," he said, his voice thin but steady, "it is time Miss Vane heard what her mother intended her to possess." By noon the next day, Loxley House had become the kind of room Lady Maud could not govern because every chair in it had been placed before she arrived. Adrian had sent formal invitations before breakfast, each sealed with dark wax and written in a hand so exact that refusal would have sounded like confession. Lady Beatrice came from her townhouse, with Mrs. Alderley in her carriage, the two widows looking less like guests than a tribunal dressed for afternoon calls. Mrs. Feltonton arrived pale and shaken, still carrying the humiliation of seeing her paper, used for a forged letter beneath her own roof. Lady Harbury followed, nervous to the point of piety. Mr. Pemberdane entered last, small, white-haired and grave, his leather portfolio held against his chest, as if it contained not papers, but the last breath of an old promise. Cecily stood near the long drawing-room window, while the witnesses settled. The morning light was cool across the polished table. A decanter of water, inkstand, blotter, and neat piles of documents waited in the center. Everything looked orderly. That made the disorder of her life seem even more deliberate. Lady Maud entered with Florence beside her. The older woman wore black silk and no visible fear. Florence wore pale blue, a mistake of color, because it reminded Cecily of the dress whose hem Martha had pinned, while unpaid wages lay hidden beneath ribbon and music. Florence's eyes moved to Adrian first, then to the table, then to Mr. Dane. She looked younger than she had at Lady Harbury's musicale, not innocent, merely unprepared for consequence. Adrian waited until Lady Maud had been seated. Then he crossed to the head of the table and drew back the chair there. He did not sit. He turned it slightly towards Cecily. "Miss Vane," he said, his voice carrying without force, "this chair is yours." No one spoke. Cecily felt every gaze upon her, not laughing now, not dismissing, not deciding whether she might stand near the wall until needed. She walked to the chair. Her legs did not tremble. The packet of her mother's papers lay before her, and beside it rested the cracked pearl-handled fan, closed but present, the repaired guard still marked by the line that had saved the truth. She sat. Adrian took the chair at her right, not the head, not the center. Lady Beatrice's mouth softened for 1 second before becoming dangerous again. "Proceed, Mr. Dane. My patience has been well exercised and poorly rewarded." Mr. Dane opened his portfolio. "Mrs. Eleanor Vane, first wife of Sir Edmund Vane and mother to Miss Cecily Vane, executed a settlement dated March 3rd, 1824. Under that settlement, a portion of her income, certain personal effects, and accumulated interest were to be preserved for Miss Vane's maintenance and independence upon her majority." The words were plain. Cecily clung to that plainness. It did not plead, it did not perform, it stood. Lady Maud lifted her chin. Settlements are often misunderstood by people who discover them late. Mr. Dane adjusted his spectacles. "That is why copies were kept." He placed a sealed document on the table. "This bears Mrs. Vane's instruction and Sir Edmund Vane's acknowledgement." Mrs. Alderley leaned forward. "And after Sir Edmund's death, notices were sent regarding the balance and use of the fund," Mr. Dane said. "Some funds were drawn under household necessity. Later entries do not support that description." Lady Maud's fan opened with a soft snap. "A household is not maintained by abstract virtue. Sir Edmund left obligations. Florence required presentation. Creditors required reassurance. Hadleigh Close had to appear respectable." Cecily looked at her, "And I had to appear grateful." The room stilled. Lady Maud's eyes narrowed. "You had a roof. My mother left me more than a roof." Mr. Dane placed another paper down. "These sums, though not vast, were sufficient for Miss Vane's clothing, companionage, if needed, personal allowance, and ordinary independence. They were not intended for Miss Florence Vane's music instruction, London gowns, or debts incurred to preserve appearances." Florence flushed. "I didn't know they were Cecily's." Lady Beatrice turned her gaze on her. "You knew enough to smile when she was made small." Florence swallowed. "That isn't fair." "No," Cecily said quietly. It was not. Florence looked at her then, and for the first time the younger woman found no convenient weakness to attack. Cecily did not look angry enough to be dismissed, nor triumphant enough to be called cruel. She looked tired of lies. That was worse. Adrian spoke to Mr. Dane. What follows? A formal audit of Hadleigh accounts, Mr. Dane replied. Miss Vane's remaining funds will be transferred under proper oversight until the matter is fully settled. A claim for repayment may be made against sums misapplied. Lady Maud Vane can no longer manage those accounts without examination. Mrs. Felton, voice strained, said, And the forged letter, Mr. Dane looked toward Lady Maud, then Florence. That is a separate disgrace, but not a small one. Mrs. Alderley's cane touched the floor, nor one this county will forget. Charity committees cannot be administered by women who forge, pity, and misplace funds. Lady Harbury drew herself up, eager now that courage had witnesses. Lady Maud's name will be removed from the parish subscription committee until matters are resolved. Resolved, Lady Beatrice said. How delicate. Say until trust is restored, which may take longer than the rebuilding of Rome. Mrs. Felton's face was still pale. No further invitations will issue from my house while this matter remains under audit. Lady Maud looked at her with cold contempt. How quickly friends become judges, how slowly victims are believed, Cecily said. The sentence ended the exchange more surely than anger. Adrian placed one hand on the table, palm down, not striking, not threatening, simply marking authority. Until council completes the audit, Lady Maud will not threaten Miss Vane, Martha, Mr. Ellery, any dismissed servant, or any person willing to testify truthfully. Hadleigh Close will be managed through proper counsel and Mr. Dane's office. Any creditor connected to the disputed expenses will receive notice that the accounts are under review. Lady Maud's face whitened. Creditors, Cecily saw, frightened her more than shame. Shame could be dressed. Credit could not. You have no authority to command my household, Lady Maud said. I have authority to refuse my house, my patronage, and my name to anyone who uses them to bury fraud. Adrian's voice remained level. You used my house once. You will not do so again, Florence whispered. My engagement will be ruined. Lady Beatrice looked at her with no mercy. If it cannot survive the truth of the forged letter, then it was never an engagement. It was upholstery. Florence's eyes filled, but the tears did not soften the room. Cecily looked at her stepsister and felt something close to pity, though not forgiveness. You may not have known every account, she said. But at Mrs. Felton's, you knew the paper came from the morning room. At Lady Harbury's, you knew the folded note was meant to make me look scheming. You did not need to know the whole theft to enjoy spending its profits. Florence covered her face. Lady Maud rose. Enough, no, Cecily said. It has only now become enough. She turned to Mr. Dane. Before any amount is restored to me, Martha's unpaid wages must be settled. Mr. Ellery's as well. Any servant dismissed or delayed in payment to protect Florence's season or household. Appearances should be paid first. Martha was not in the room, but Cecily imagined her in the lower hall, sitting too upright, pretending not to listen. Mr. Dane inclined his head. I will make it the first instruction. Mrs. Alderley nodded once. That is justice in proper order. Lady Maud stared as if Cecily had wasted victory on servants. You think this makes you noble? No, Cecily said. I think it pays a debt. The room withdrew from Lady Maud after that. Not dramatically. No one shouted. No one called for humiliation. They did what society did most cruelly when it had finally chosen a side. They became polite. Mrs. Felton would not meet Lady Maud's eyes. Lady Harbury looked past her shoulder. Mrs. Alderley turned to Cecily and asked whether she might call next week. Lady Beatrice requested tea, as if the matter of Lady Maud's influence had become too settled to discuss further. Lady Maud left with Florence beside her, each step controlled. At the door she turned once towards Cecily. For years that look had been a command. Today it found no servant to carry it, no room willing to echo it, and no frightened girl left to obey. The door closed. The silence afterward did not feel empty. It felt cleared. Witnesses began to move. Papers were gathered, and Mr. Dane took Lady Beatrice aside to discuss copies. Cecily remained seated at the head of the table, her hands resting near her mother's fan. Adrian remained beside her until the room thinned, then stood. The drawing-room door stayed open. A footman was visible beyond it. Every propriety remained intact, which made the tenderness in his voice more careful. You did not ask for revenge. No, you asked for wages. Justice begins nearest the floor. His eyes softened in a way that made her look down before she lost the composure she had fought to keep all morning. I have never known anyone like you. You have known many ladies allowed to become themselves. Earlier. Perhaps. He drew a breath, and the Duke seemed to step back just enough for the man to stand before her. Miss Vane, I would like permission to call upon you formally. Not to quiet gossip. Not to repair scandal. Not because I pity what was done to you. Cecily lifted her eyes. Then why? Because I wish to know the woman who could sit in this chair and think first of a maid's wages. The words reached her without trapping her. No room closed around them. No scandal pushed at her back. No forged paper forced an answer. Do not ask me as my rescuer, Your Grace. Adrian's gaze held hers. Then as a man, Cecily. May I court you? Her name, spoken without possession, felt like a door opened from the inside. She thought of Hadleigh, of the violet seal, of the first chair brought before he knew the insult, of the silence he had learned to keep so she could speak. Yes, she said. You may. He bowed over her hand without kissing it, because restraint had become part of the trust between them. When he released her, the chair at the head of the table stood behind her, no longer proof that she had been allowed to sit. It was proof that she had risen. Cecily returned to Hadleigh Close on a clear morning in June, not because the house summoned her, but because at last it could not. The carriage stopped before the front steps this time. No side lane, no hidden door, no hurried footfall on the back stairs. Adrian did not come inside with her, though he had ridden from Harrowmere and waited near the gate with the patience he had learned to make visible. Mr. Pember Dane's clerk stood in the hall with the account books. Martha stood beside Cecily with a ring of household keys in one hand, and a face so stern with feeling that anyone less familiar with her would have mistaken devotion for anger. The drawing-room looked smaller than Cecily remembered. The curtains were still faded along the lower hems. The silver tea service had lost its shine, without Lady Maud's command, to polish appearances before debts. The escritoire remained by the window, the same dark walnut surface where the violet-sealed insult had first lain in triumph. Cecily crossed to it and rested her hand on the closed lid. Nothing in the wood answered. That was the mercy. Rooms kept memory, but they did not own it unless one returned as a prisoner. The wage ledger, please, Cecily said. Mr. Dane's clerk opened the book on the table. The first name were Martha, Mr. Ellery, 2 dismissed maids, and a stable boy whose pay had been delayed during Florence's London preparations. Cecily signed each instruction with her full name, not hurriedly, not as a charity, but as a debt finally given the dignity of record. Martha looked away at the first signature. By the third, she had pressed her lips together so tightly that Cecily set down the pen. Martha, I'm not crying, Martha said. No one accused you. Then no one should begin. Cecily let the small smile come and pass. These keys should remain with you until Mrs. Ellery is settled into the office rooms. She knows the linens, the kitchens, and the servants better than any steward sent to look important. Martha stared at the keys as though Cecily had placed a title in her palm. With me. With you. Hadleigh has obeyed fear long enough. It may try competence for a change. Mr. Dane's clerk coughed into his glove to conceal a smile. Martha closed her hand around the keys. Your mother would approve. Cecily looked toward the window. The lawn outside lay bright, untroubled, and entirely ordinary. I hope she would approve of more than the accounts. Lady Maud had left 2 days earlier under the respectable cover of visiting a cousin in Bath. No one said banishment. No one needed to. Her name had been removed from 2 charity committees. Her credit inquiries had become cautious, and county doors that had once opened for her father's rank and widow's black silk now opened slowly, if at all. Florence had gone to an aunt in Sussex, where the broken engagement was called a postponement for health, though everyone knew false letters were poor dowry. Cecily did not rejoice over either departure. Rejoicing would have kept them too near. Instead, she closed the wage ledger, handed it to the clerk, and walked once through the room without shrinking. At the door, she looked back at the escritoire. The violet seal was gone. So was the girl who had believed it must be endured in silence. 3 weeks later, the chapel bell near Harrowmere Hall rang across the lawns with a solemn note that seemed to travel through June leaves and settle over the lake. The wedding was small, but not secret. Cecily had insisted upon that distinction, and Adrian had understood it at once. Lady Beatrice declared that between his dislike of spectacle and Cecily's refusal of concealment, they had arrived at good taste by accident. Mrs. Alderney came in dove-grey silk. Mrs. Felton attended with humility, carefully worn and not overpraised. Mr. Dane sat near the front, white-haired and upright, carrying a handkerchief he pretended was for dust. Martha sat in the first pew, wearing a new dark dress purchased with her restored wages, and dignity enough to challenge a bishop. Cecily wore ivory silk of simple cut, paid for from her own restored income before Adrian had been permitted to add so much as a ribbon. He had argued once. She had lifted one eyebrow. He had surrendered with more grace than many men brought to victory. At her wrist, closed with a narrow length of blue ribbon, rested her mother's repaired pearl-handled fan. The craftsman had offered to replace the cracked guard entirely. Cecily had refused. A thing could be mended without pretending it had never been broken. When she walked down the chapel aisle, Adrian turned. The Duke of Loxley stood where every eye expected composure, and gave them something quieter instead. He looked relieved, not triumphant, not possessive. Relieved, as if her arrival were not the completion of an arrangement, but the answer to a question he had never presumed to command. His voice held steady through the vows, until the word cherish, where it caught so slightly that only Cecily heard. She answered clearly. Steadiness had once been armor. Now it was a gift freely placed in his hands. After the register was signed, Lady Beatrice kissed Cecily's cheek with brisk affection. There, you are Duchess of Loxley. Don't become tiresome about it. Cecily smiled. I'll rely on you to prevent me, a wise beginning. I enjoy correction when properly aimed at others. Adrian leaned near enough to be heard by Cecily alone. She once corrected a bishop over the placement of a footstool. Was she right? Entirely. Outside the chapel, there was no wild applause, no ballroom thunder, no public performance of forgiveness for people who had earned none. There were roses on the south wall, sunlight on old stone, witnesses who knew what had been restored, and Martha crying openly while pretending to inspect Cecily's hem. Cecily stepped into the day as a woman whose name had been returned to her before it joined another. Harrowmere Hall received her that afternoon with doors open and no rigid line of servants arranged like inspection. She had asked for that too. Adrian had said, "Would you rather meet the household by degrees?" And she had answered, "Yes, I would rather know people than be presented with obedience." So Mrs. Rowe, the housekeeper, brought the household keys without ceremony, but with great pride. Brackett bowed, as though order itself had found a better mistress. The gardener presented late roses, and blushed when Cecily thanked him by name. In the days that followed, she learned Harrowmere not as a guest, careful with borrowed air, but as its duchess by practice. She asked questions before altering routines. She listened when Mrs. Rowe explained stores, when the cook explained market days, when a housemaid admitted the East Passage draft made winter work miserable. Authority, Cecily knew, could repair or repeat harm depending on whether it listened. Adrian watched and did not interrupt. When she requested that servants' wages be reviewed monthly rather than delayed for quarterly convenience, he ordered the change before she finished explaining. "You trust me?" she asked afterward. "I trust the woman who paid debts before accepting congratulations." On the fourth evening after the wedding, He led her to a room overlooking the lake. The windows were open to mild summer air. A writing desk stood near the best light, with fresh paper, account books, poetry, estate records, and 3 novels Lady Beatrice had labelled morally useful because they annoyed dull men. Near the hearth stood 2 chairs. One was upholstered in soft blue, comfortable without grandeur. The second sat close enough for conversation, not so close as to presume. On the small table between them lay the repaired fan. Cecily stopped on the threshold. Adrian remained behind her. "This was prepared for you," he said. "But if it is wrong, it will be changed." She looked at the desk, the chairs, the view of water turning silver in the lowering sun. "You arranged all this." "I consulted Lady Beatrice, Martha, Mrs. Rowe and Brackett. I survived with difficulty. A formidable committee. Martha rejected 3 chairs. Good." His mouth curved. "I thought so." Cecily crossed to the table and touched the fan. The crack remained beneath the smooth repair, a line one could feel only if one knew where to place the fingers. "You kept the mark. You asked me to." She turned to him. The man who had once believed protection meant placing her somewhere safe, now asked whether safety had been made in the shape she chose. That was the answer she had needed long before she could name it. "It is beautiful," she said. "Then you will use it?" "Yes." Adrian glanced at the blue chair. A memory passed between them, clear as a bell. The first drawing room, the first command, the first chair brought before he knew the wound. "Would you like to sit?" he asked. Cecily looked at him for a long moment. Then she took the fan, crossed to the chair, and did not sit alone. Instead, she drew the second chair closer. "Not without you." Joy moved through his face, with the restraint of a man who had learned that deep feeling did not require possession. He came to her, and they sat side by side as evening settled over Harrowmere. For a while, neither spoke. Silence no longer meant punishment, dismissal, or the careful swallowing of truth. In this room, silence had room for breath. Adrian took her hand gently, as if marriage had not made tenderness careless. "Are you happy, Cecily?" She watched the lake darken beyond the open windows. She thought of a violet seal, a hidden key, a mother's hand, a table of witnesses, and a chair that had become not permission, but proof of change. "Yes," she said. "Not because everything is mended." His thumb brushed lightly over her glove. "Why then?" Cecily opened the fan. The repaired silk whispered in the summer air. "Because I am not broken by what remains." Adrian lifted her hand and held it, not as a vow performed before witnesses, but as a promise kept after justice. Outside, the household settled into evening. Inside, the Duchess of Loxley sat beside her husband in a room of her own choosing, the cracked fan open on her lap, with no need to prove she belonged anywhere at all.